Councillor Drake?
I was going to offer Councillor Hamilton's apologies. Unfortunately, it's his wife's funeral on Friday, so I doubt whether he'll be joining us.
Okay, Chair, the live stream is live. Over to yourself. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny meeting tonight, Wednesday, the 20th of November. This meeting is being conducted remotely. So before we get into the agenda, I shall just start with our usual announcement. So if I can remind everybody present, this remote meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please use the raise hand function, which is located in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and that will put you in the speaker queue accordingly. When you're invited to speak by the chair, could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that you can be both seen and heard? Please can we ensure all debate is conducted verbally and not via that chat function. That's for the sake of the recording. And please, when you're not speaking, can you keep your camera off and also mute yourself in order to avoid any background noise or any feedback. So then, if I can please welcome all committee and non-committee members, cabinet members, all of our officers, and also to any one of you out there watching this live meeting broadcast. So if we can move to part one, which is the apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Lovelock-Edwards and also from Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Wood, you have your hand up. Councillor Wood, do you want to come in?
Oh, sorry, press the button again. Yeah, Councillor Fisher will be in about 10 minutes, and I'm pretty sure Councillor Carroll will be in. I think he's driving.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, okay then. So if we then can move on to agenda item 2, that's our minutes of the meetings that were held on the 2nd of October 2024. So for everybody present at that, hopefully that it was an extraordinary meeting, by the way. Everybody present is happy with the minutes. So if I can have a hand, please, to move. Thank you, Councillor Drake, Councillor Hanks. And then our second meeting was the 23rd of October 2024. So for all members present there who are happy with the minutes, can I have a hand to move, please? Thank you both, Councillor Hanks and Councillor Drake. That's great. So if we move then on to agenda item 3, that's our declarations of interest and the nature of such interests. So can I ask all committee members, please, now to declare if they do have any interests? Councillor Johnson.
In relation to item 4, the annual update on the corporate asset plan. This refers to Jenner Park. I'm a member and a vice president for the local football club. Using that stadium, it's not core or central to the item. So I'm noting that I'm a member, but it's not necessary for me to leave.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, then if we now move on to agenda item 4, which is the reference from Cabinet from the 18th of July. This is the Corporate Asset Management Plan annual update. And we have Lorna Cross, I think, to take us through this report. Thank you, Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to quickly run through the report and the item in front of you. As highlighted on the agenda, this is a reference from Cabinet on the 18th of July, as the Chair set out. It's in respect of the annual update for the Corporate Asset Management Plan 2024 actions, and outlines progress and priorities in managing the Council's land and property assets. The Corporate Asset Management Plan emphasises using assets as sustainably as possible to support service delivery, financial efficiency and climate action goals as well. The way we manage our land and property assets has a direct impact on the services we provide, and the Corporate Asset Management Plan and its action plan seeks to ensure that we achieve the optimum use of those property assets while supporting service delivery across the Council. The CAMP sets out a series of objectives with actions and targets associated with each of the overarching aim of improving asset use to ensure efficiency and sustainability, as I mentioned, and ensuring we've got the right asset in the right location, but also looking at opportunities generating revenue through surplus assets. Where possible, collaborating with public sector partners and other partners to enhance service delivery and efficiency, and then potentially disposing of any surplus assets that don't serve any part of the Council's priorities ultimately, after looking at all of those other options that are available to us.
Lorna, can I just interject?
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
pull your mic down a bit? I think it's giving a bit of a reverb, if it helps. Thanks.
How's that?
Thank you.
Is that a bit better? Is that better?
Speak a little bit more so we can.
Is that better, Karen? Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming across better to me now.
Great.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Apologies. So we continue to review our asset portfolio to determine opportunities to make our assets portfolio as efficient as we can. We've been reviewing our assets over the last 20 years or more, actually, since the old Audit Commission back in 2000 brought out their report called Hot Property, which recommended that local authorities and public sector bodies had asset management plans. So in the backdrop of that, we're generally quite lean and efficient in the use of our assets. We don't have a whole raft of surplus assets flying around. However, there's always opportunities to consider further efficiencies, especially as our workforce move to a more agile and hybrid way of working. Appendix A of the report provides an update for the 2023-4 year against our key objectives, and the action plan hopefully sets out clearly the progress made over the last 12 months. However, as we're a few months on from where the update was presented to Cabinet in July, obviously there's been a few more updates since then. So I just wanted to elaborate on a couple of those specific actions quite briefly, particularly item 2 on the action tracker in the appendix that sets out the position in respect of our ongoing review of our assets. Since Cabinet considered that update, the new Reshaping Assets group has been set up, and cross-service officers are now meeting, and that group is led by the Chief Exec as project sponsor, and that team is ably supported by the Council's Transformational Change team. So there's been quite a bit of progress on that item. Item 3 on the action tracker sets out the position in relation to our iShare Your Space project. And since Cabinet received the update, I can further advise that we've completed the moves through our Learning and Skills Directorate, together with a team from Derry, who have relocated into the civic offices. In addition, since Cabinet the report was considered, the Levelling Up Fund position has been confirmed, which now obviously allows us to work at pace to consider the next phase of moves for Police and Social Services Directorates from the Docs Office. I just wanted to briefly mention item 4 again. I'm not going to say too much about this, as my colleague Anne Sharp is here to present the Council's new carbon management plan. However, I would like to share some good news around some external funding that we've secured quite recently. So we've managed to secure a further £125,000 worth of grant support from Welsh Government Assets Collaboration Programme, and that's to help decarbonise further community centres. Members will be aware that we've already done 3 or 4 of those sites already. We've also been successful in securing revenue support to look at options to increase the biodiversity of our community centres and some of our libraries as well. So that's really good news, and some updates since Cabinet. Obviously, the Council continues to invest in our built estates in terms of energy efficiency upgrades, including LED lighting, solar installations, and aligning with the commitment to net zero carbon emissions by 2030. But more to be said on that on further agenda items on this in this meeting. Item 5, just wanted to really briefly update on that, on the tracker, just to say that the corporate landlord model action work has been ongoing behind the scenes since Cabinet, and we are at the point where we are pretty much near a position where we'll have an outline business case to support this action, and hopefully we'll be making some recommendations in the near future in that regard. That's pretty much as I wanted to say on this agenda item, if that's okay, Chair, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lorna, for that update, and it's really good to hear that that there's further grant money coming to us to support those decarbonisation of our community buildings. That's really, really positive news. Councillor Franks has got his hand up, so would you like to come in first? Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. I'm looking at the very last page, and I'll say item 6, shall I? Relating to transfer of sports facilities to suitable clubs. Now, I'm taking it this is incorporated in the Community Action Transfer project. Yes, good. And as I might have mentioned before, I can see great opportunities for such things. However, I don't think I can see much detail of progress. These schemes, for instance, Stradlin Park, well, that's come and gone, hasn't it? And I just wonder what are the other schemes that we are now pursuing?
Through you, Chair. There were, as you can imagine, community asset transfer isn't the quickest set of projects that council deals with. It does take some time in working at proposals and communications with community groups, but there are a number. There are a couple listed within this paper. But there's also ongoing discussions, as I understand it, around some potential asset transfers in Lantwick Major with the Town Council. In terms of highway assets, there's also some conversations conversations happening at an advanced stage around Penarth athletics field as well. And there's also a community asset transfer request in as well for consideration around Park Brynadon in Dinas Powys. Not the whole park, but just a small proportion of that. So there's quite a few asset transfers within the mix at the moment, but by their very nature, they do take a considerable amount of time to actually get to a point where we are transferring assets. So, you know, the paper just sets out what we've done, what we're trying to do, and what we're doing behind the scenes. But as you quite rightly point out, Councillor Franks, the reshaping assets project now will really start getting a grip of some of these transfers that can happen at pace, hopefully within resources available to us.
Okay, thank you. I must say, from the very start of this, I've questioned whether the authority is allocating adequate officer resource, because as you say, and I accept that this is very time consuming and very involved. And I think sometimes we're expecting too much. However, I hope you don't mind me saying so, but a lot of what you've said is rather nebulous. Is that a fair word? There's nothing hard. There's no hard facts. There's no finances. There's no time scale. And if you say it's not possible, fine. But really, as someone who is supportive, I'd like there to be finances, financial information, and a time scale. So what can you say to that?
Yeah, sure. And again, through you, Chair, I think we're working very closely with our service colleagues in that respect. And at the point where we are making recommendations for a particular community asset transfer, all of those financial implications will be reported to Cabinet at the appropriate time in terms of the savings that are made as a result of the community asset transfer. But I'll move that away because I think it might be buffering again. So, I mean, the financial considerations will obviously be part of that business case that goes through to Cabinet at the appropriate time. In terms of time frame, we work as quickly as we can in terms of the with the resources we've got available to us. There are time frames set out within the policy, the current policy for community asset transfer, and we do our very best to adhere to those time frames. There is a significant amount of time required for drafting and that kind of thing. Once you've dealt with the expression of interest, you go through to a stage 2 community asset transfer proposal, full business case proposal. That's where that's where the hard graft starts after that. So that's when our legal team are involved, etc. So it's how long is a piece of string, to be perfectly frank with you, Councillor, because it depends on the complexity of the site. It depends on how quickly each community group respond in certain circumstances. It certainly, on the other side of the fence, it depends on how quickly the council can react to questions and providing further information and all that kind of stuff. So I can't give you an exact time frame for how long each asset transfer will take to transfer, other than we try our best to keep to the programme that's set out in the policy. But then when it gets to the stage where heads of terms have agreed and it goes to our legal colleagues, then that is a process which will unfortunately take as long as it needs to take to get to an agreed position for the transfer to happen. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's very difficult to give timeframes.
Right. I suspect I'll be asking this question a few more times. I've just spotted in the list Seal Park is mentioned, and I think it would be prudent for me to flag up that I have dispensation to speak but not vote on that matter, although it is something that we're not discussing tonight, but I just mention it for caution's sake. Thank you, Lorna and Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. And I know that you support the principle of asset transfers, and that you appreciate that it is complicated. And there are a number of ongoing asset transfers at the moment, aren't there, Lorna?
Yes.
I know that in a previous meeting, the leader has supported a review of the process, which is complicated, and we know it is. So hopefully that will happen in the goodness of time. And also in another previous meeting, we talked about we see as the committee a need for support for community groups who are taking on an asset transfer, almost like a guide to it, so that they appreciate and that their fears are allayed to how they're going to manage it commercially and how they do all the things that they need to do. Because it is, it's important. It's really great for communities to have the building and to be able to do what they want to do with it. But there's a lot that we could do, I think, to support them. So that's great. Councillor Hanks, you've got your hand up. So would you like to come back in?
Councillor Hanks, could you come onto screen, please?
If Councillor Hanks is having some technical issues, shall we move to Councillor Johnson, and hopefully Councillor Hanks can come back in?
Yeah, I'll reach out to Councillor Hanks for you, Chair, in the meantime.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, do you want to speak, please?
Thank you very much, Lorna, for the presentation. I've got 3 questions. One relates to the table on pages 9 and 10 of the report. This is a savings over 5 years table. 2/3 of the savings are seen in the current year. As we are currently halfway through the year, how many of the savings do you see happening? Second question, earlier on in the report, it talks about relocating social care staff out of the docks office and into several other locations. I don't know whether you may be able to speak to this, but where would be the best place to raise questions if this will continue to impact as a social care team, if the teams are in the same place at the same time and will be spread across a number of new locations? Will this have an impact on the service that they deliver? And the third question then, going back to the savings table, there's a mention next year of savings in Colquitt Sports Centre. And I just wanted to ask whether you might be able to provide a little bit of information about where the savings will come from, as this is currently subject to, under the attention of the public recently in relation to some aspects of that centre. Thank you, Lorna.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for the question. In terms of this savings question, the docks saving is slightly delayed as we were waiting for the LUF decision, but partly mitigated in year with savings elsewhere, and taking action for cash savings now. We're looking at a few things in that respect. To answer your question about Colquitt, savings is currently being reviewed as part of budget setting process, and maybe Tom will be able to give a bit more information on that. And then the third question around social services impact. We are working very closely with the service in respect to their possible relocations to other sites. We have been for a number of months in actual fact, and no action would be taken without social services colleagues being 100% happy about the process. So those conversations and engagement will continue until we've got a position where everybody is happy. So please be reassured that that's the case.
Okay, Diolch yn fawr, Lorna. Ydy
Is Tom Hearn able to respond to the question on Colquitt or?
Certainly, thank you. Good evening, Councillor Johnson. In terms of the Colquitt Centre, I'm going to need to get you some information on that specific site separately. I haven't got it to hand this evening, but as Lorna mentioned, we're currently putting together the budget proposals for members. We met with colleagues, or a meeting rather with colleagues this week and next week to look at the savings that they've already identified for 2025-26 to review whether they're still feasible to achieve or not, as well as obviously identifying further savings opportunities. So that one is under review currently, and with your permission and Chair, I'll get you some specific information relating to Colquitt and send it on our full meeting.
diolch yn fawr. Oes modd I gylch.
Thank you. Would this be able to be circulated to everybody else on the committee?
Diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hanks, are you able to come in now?
I'll try again.
Lovely.
Sorry.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you, Chair. Lorna, I'm not sure, I missed a few questions, the beginning of Councillor Johnson's questions. My question was really how much of the docks office is now occupied, 50%, or is there a bit of a percentage you could give us as to how busy it is and how many are there? I just wondered, HR are in temporary situ in the civic offices. I just wondered where they were going to go. It's obviously a listed building, and just wondered what the outcome or what were the thoughts of what we're going to do with the docks office as well. And my second question was C1V. We had waste housing, homelessness, adult social services, Blue Badge and SRS. Have they all moved out now? And I think social services was still Councillor Johnson. I just came back in on that. So that was still being worked on. Otherwise, most of the other departments have been sorted. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Chair, just through you, in terms of the docks occupancy question, first of all, it's probably fair to say that we're below probably 50% occupancy in the building at the moment. The Directorate of Place and Social Services are the only teams still remaining. And we're working quite hard now with the business case planning to move them across to civic offices and for social services, as we've just heard, to other locations as well within the portfolio. The people from the contact centre have all moved across, so they're in situ in their new home. So our contact centre and our health colleagues, telecare, all of those services are now sat in their new locations, and by all accounts, I have it on good authority, they're very happy and pleased with their new space. So we are looking at options, obviously, for the C1V space now that it's become vacant. And the next question was around HR moves. So HR will probably be one of the teams that will be last to move, unfortunately, because they are in the decamp space. So it's like that little set square. We have to have the vacant space in order to move people around. We're in the docks office, we're looking to hopefully get some savings as a result of some unique circumstances around a heritage asset, insofar as normal NNDR, which is our non-domestic rate liability, would kick back in after 3 months of being vacant. But if we can vacate a floor quite quickly within the docks office by consolidating on other floors, then we're looking to make a saving, a permanent saving on NNDR for one of the floors to make cash savings from reducing our footprint. So that's something that we're actively pursuing at the moment. So that, that's something that is going to support that budget position that we talked about earlier. Have I missed anything, Councillor Hanks?
No, not really. Just the future of the Docs Office. What was the intention?
Yeah. So as the announcement came for the positive news on levelling up, we took decisive action then to pursue our plan, which is to seek a partner. So when everybody comes out of the Docs Office, we're looking for a partner arrangement to basically give the council revenue savings, and the plan for the partner is to deliver almost like a tech hub there for small businesses. So the type of businesses that are supported by the likes of Business in Focus and that type of thing. So that offer is actually out to the market at the moment via our consultants, Cushman & Wakefield. It's on Sell to Wales, and as soon as the 6-week window of marketing is complete, there'll be a review of the proposals and the bids that come in, and everything will be reported back to Cabinet then for a decision on whether to move forward with one of those partners. So that'll hopefully underline the business case as well as to support the moves across to the civic for those two remaining directorates. So again, we're moving at pace on that aspect as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Hanks, and thank you, Lorna. I don't see any other hands, so I've just got 2 quick comments, maybe a recommendation. I can see that last November, a year ago, we held a workshop with our PSB partners, and we went through our commitments with them for Climate Emergency Challenge Plan, and sounds like it was really successful. So my question really is, are we going to follow this up? And if not, why not? And I'm thinking that a kind of like an annual COP Vela Glam style type thing, because we know we can't do this on our own. And there is definitely, I think, a benefit in seeing this on the agenda for a regular meet. And then my second question, which is to do with the sustainable use of land. I can see that we are disposing of small parcels for financial gain. And I wonder if it could be possible for us to look at small parcels of land for communities to use for growing, because it's quite an important part of what we do with our communities. We're talking about this all the time, aren't we? So yeah, if that's a possibility, if we could look at using parcels of land that we can offer then to the community groups that would be interested in using it for growing. So those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Yeah, great. I mean, both fantastic questions, actually. In terms of the, if I take the PSB question first, yeah, absolutely. This can't be the last of what we do in respect to that partnership working. We're proposing to put the new charter to PSB in December for discussion and decisions based on what the group discussed back last year. And I'm sure there'll be some kind of recommendation within that discussion to have that ongoing dialogue. And certainly, I know as of today, there's been an email sent out from Project Zero colleagues to our PSB Asset Management and Climate Change partners with a whole list of, I think there's about 8 topics there, and asking for feedback on what key priorities partners have for the next, basically the next topic of discussion. So we're constantly trying to further that work, and we're certainly not sitting on laurels and not taking that action further. So I think that charter will be a key piece of work to get over the line, and then bringing on further work as a result of those that engagement activity that I just mentioned then.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's great. In terms of sustainability and land, again, really interesting question, because we held a land carbon workshop for the whole of the council. So in terms of directorates, a couple of months back, we held it in Porthcurry because we thought it was a really good venue to hold a land carbon workshop in Porthcurry Park. And some of the actions coming out of that workshop revolved around us considering not only the financial gain for disposals of small parts of land, but also the impact from a biodiversity, climate change and nature emergency perspective. So now all of our reports that go to a Strategic Insight Board are reviewed for impact on biodiversity, nature emergency and carbon. So it's a really interesting concept to look at that sustainability picture in the round, rather than just, traditionally estates teams just were looking at capital receipts and they had targets and that was the be all and end of it. But you're absolutely right, there is a bigger picture. A lot of these tiny little parcels of land tend to be adjacent to houses, and they're so small, right next to verges. There's not a great deal of impact by disposing of them. However, we have made recommendations in the last couple of weeks in Insight Board reports that we, as part of those small disposal agreements where there is no other potential use, that we request potentially to have part of the land use for planting trees and that kind of thing. So we are picking it up. So even if it's something that is not, a tiny little bit of highway verge might not necessarily be something that can be safely worked on by the community, bearing in mind, it's, nothing is off the cards. So, if there's a proposal that we think that has merit in being discussed with the community, we'll absolutely look at that.
Yeah, and that sounds as if we are all on the same page, which is wonderful news. So if the committee is mindful then to further that with a recommendation from us that we consider the small parcels of land that could be used, not just for biodiversity purposes and not something that the community could also benefit from if they should wish to do some growing or some planting, or that would be wonderful. So I think there's nobody else that have got their hand up, unless this conversation has created little sparks in other committee members' heads. No, that's great. Anyway, so thank you for that. So if we go to the recommendations, that was that the committee has considered this report, highlighting that the progress that's been made in the last year against our targets in this corporate asset management plan, and that also our collective views are referred back to Cabinet for them to consider. And if I can just slip in that recommendation that we also consider which parcels of land that could be used for the community so that they could possibly do some growing of their own. If committee are supportive of that, if I can have a hand, that would be wonderful. Karen has come in, so I hope I haven't done something that isn't okay. Oh,
it's because I'm in.
There's a bit of feedback there.
Yep, sorry, Chair. I'm sure Karen will be back with you shortly. In the meantime, as she's joining us, could I kindly ask, I'm receiving a screen share request from Councillor Franks. I'm not sure that was actually Councillor Franks' intention. Could I ask him to stop his screen share in the top left-hand corner of his screen, please? Thank you. It's now gone. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Karen. I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Karen, I'm afraid your audio won't register because your headset was removed. But if you leave the meeting and close the browser window and come back in, then it will come on screen, come back on audio for you. Bear with us one moment, Chair.
No problem.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Lovely. Great. Okay.
Welcome back.
All I wanted to say, Chair, was with regard to your comments, from what
Yeah.
I've noted tonight, most of the comments have been agreed by
Yes.
or provided, the answers have been provided by Lorna. So
Yes,
it's
they
only
have.
the recommendation, really.
Yes.
And I'm glad you made a recommendation. Otherwise, we would have said your comments, no need to go
I
back to
know.
Cabinet, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's all I was going to say, really. Thank you.
That's great. So we can do that. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. So can we have a hand to move then from there, if everybody's content with that? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and thank you, Councillor Drake. Okay, that was I enjoyed that debate. That was great. If we can move then on to agenda item 5, that's our carbon management plan. That's also a reference from Cabinet, but this is from the 5th of September. And I think we have Officer Anne Sharp with us. Yes, we do. Welcome. And we shall wait for and Lorna. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just do a quick introduction, if I may, before I bring Anne in. So this item, as you're aware, is a reference from Cabinet on the 5th of September this year, and it's in relation to the Council's proposed Carbon Management Plan 2024 to 2030. This is our third iteration of the Council's Carbon Management Plan, the first iteration of the plan being in 2008. So we've been looking at this for almost 20 years. The first two iterations, I think is fair to say, were predominantly focused on reducing building-related carbon footprint. However, greater emphasis is now on reducing organisational-wide carbon emissions, including our supply chains and the Scope 3 emissions. As members will be aware, Welsh Government have communicated ambitions for the public sector to be carbon neutral by 2030, and the Council reports annually on its corporate carbon emissions in line with Welsh Government's reporting requirements, methodology and guidelines. So our new plan has been developed by the Decarbonisation and Energy section, and that's where Anne comes in as our specialist, but also with input from key service areas. And I think it's really important to say that the delivery of the plan and its actions will be a whole organisational responsibility and response. So, you know, the Decarb and Energy team can't do it all by ourselves. We have to have the support and buy-in from our colleagues across the organisation. So those actions will be monitored and reported twice yearly to Cabinet as part of Project Zero regular updates. The plan's attached at Appendix A of the original Cabinet report, and the contribution that will be made towards relevant aspects of the Council's Project Zero plan, challenge plan, are set out there. The task of reducing our carbon emissions can't be underestimated. I'm sure it's not lost on everybody, the challenge that we face. However, the significance of not reducing our operational carbon footprint shouldn't be ignored. And the Council must do what it can with the resources available to us to deliver as many of the actions within the planned period as possible. The Council's been decarbonising our built estate successfully over 20 years, as I've mentioned. But as I said, due to the increased breadth of carbon emissions reporting, projects in themselves will not be sufficient to meet the 2030 commitments as an organisation. And for that reason, the carbon management scope is greater in this version than previous. So with your agreement, Chair, I will hand over to Anne Sharp, who's our Principal Energy and Decarbonisation Officer. And she'll take you through some slides, which will hopefully put some meat on the bones and provide you with a little bit more further detail in respect of the carbon management plan. So with your permission, Chair, over to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna, and welcome, Anne. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just sharing my screen now. That's clear for everybody?
Yes, Anne, that's on screen.
Thank you. So I'll just spend a few moments setting out why the carbon management plan's needed, what does it cover, and some of the activities that we'll be looking to deliver. There'll be a time for discussion at the end. So there's obviously the legislative agenda that Lorna's set out already, both at Welsh Government UK and internationally. We're within the UN Decade of Action, and obviously the COP cycle at present as well. Lorna's already mentioned that this is our third carbon management plan, and this one's really looked to cover all aspects of the Council's activities, but also align with the wellbeing of future generations, 5 ways of working as well. So there's that legislative pull, but there's also the experiences that we're all having day to day, and this sort of push to change. We are now into more than 14 months at a global warming, with temperatures running above 1.5, which was the pledge made at the Paris COP. We've been targeting to keep emissions below these levels. Unfortunately, we're not on track with that at the moment. So our carbon management plan has used data from 22-23, and that's breakdown is shown in the pie chart on the right. We have now completed our reporting for 23-24. The trends are very similar. The carbon management plan sets out the headings as listed here. As you can hopefully see, that does represent activity across all of the organisations, including that land use topic that was just discussed in the previous agenda item. For each section, we set out the context of the activity that's being focused on, where activity has taken place in the past, how the carbon emissions looked in 22-23, and then we set out some goals and actions towards reducing those areas. We identify areas around the resources and funding. That's both what is available and what is required. Some areas we don't yet have the data sufficiently developed and baselined to be able to do full costing to set out the trajectory downwards. And obviously that's set out within the risks and barriers as well. Lorna's already touched on this. We're looking for the carbon management plan to sit within the Project Zero reporting mechanism. So we'll report twice yearly. One update will focus very much on the data and the annual report that we submit to Welsh Government. The second update is likely to be much more qualitative, and the policy agenda and delivery and activities will be a bit more narrative focused. So yes, there'll be a focus on reviewing existing policies, developing new policies to align to the decarbonisation agenda. There's a whole host of training and support available for staff, officers and councillors of the communities we're working with. And we're continuing to embed the 5 ways of working as well for the Future Generations Act. Just to look at whether we feel this is enough, the ambition for 2030 is huge, and the barriers and the risks are set out in the plan do indicate the limits that we have to achieve that target. I think what this slide is setting out really the modelling that's coming through around what decarbonisation we managed to achieve globally. If we may remain on an intermediate or high carbon lifestyle, then the trajectories for 2050 and 2100 are looking significantly warmer. And this slide is really just posing the question of our primary school pupils. What might the Vale look like for when they're readying for their retirement, and how different might that be for those of us retiring in the next decade or so? That's a very brief summary of the carbon management plan. Welcome discussion now. If that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that. It is indeed quite alarming, the speed of the planet's heating up, and we should all be quite concerned about this. And it's now time for action, isn't it? Deeds, not words, that's for sure. I have some questions, but I can see Councillor Carroll has his hand up. So if we can bring him in first. Thank you, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anne, for the presentation. I note from the report that it's estimated that the required capital investment to achieve net zero carbon by 2030 is £50 million. Are you confident that the authority will be receiving this in grants from Welsh Government, or indeed UK Government?
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, no, I can't. I think that is one of the issues. And actually, in fact, if we were granted that funding, we would still have issues around the staff resourcing to get the programmes up and running sufficiently within the timescales for 2030, and similarly the supply chain within Wales and the UK. It may not be there to help us deliver the building's focus. That 50 million figure is just to decarbonise our built assets. It's not across all of the activity of the carbon management plan. As I mentioned, we don't have baseline data for all of our activity to enable us to cost the fleet fully, for example, other activity areas.
I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for your candour on that, because I do think often when these issues are discussed or put, there isn't the level of honesty that I think we need to have in this debate. So I'm grateful for that. But my next question then is, if you don't think, or you can't guarantee that the funding is going to come from central government, how do you envisage the authority raising that cash?
I do apologise to interject at this point, but I can see that Matt Baumer has got his hand up, and he's probably in a better position to discuss the finances. And I'm also aware that the sort of question that Councillor Carroll is asking is something that, we won't know what we may or may not get in future years from government, and Anne most certainly isn't going to know that because we don't. But let me bring Matt in, if that's okay, Councillor Carroll, because he might be better
Thank you.
with some financial information.
Thank you.
Matt, if you could press your large activation button, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
There he is. Thank you.
I raised my hand to come and answer the first question, but Anne's done an admirable job with that. Thank you. The second one, there is no answer to it at this stage. The £50 million just for our physical assets highlights the scale of the challenge that's in front of us, and that's just a small proportion of our footprint. The bigger proportions in our supply chain, and the challenge is there working with suppliers who are working to a very different timescale to the council. So this the finances are a real major challenge to not only this local authority but all local authorities in hitting these targets.
No, I appreciate that, Matt. And the reason I posed the question was because it was actually something that I and my group raised at the time when the council voted to adopt this strategy, was that 2030, some 2 or 3 years ago, whenever it was that vote took place, wasn't a long time away then, and it's an even shorter time away now. And I think the council, and indeed the public sector more generally, needs to have a more honest conversation about whether this target is achievable and whether it needs to be reassessed. Because I think there is, across the board, if not a unanimous consensus, there is certainly an overwhelming opinion that as a society we should be looking to reduce our carbon emissions and produce energy and produce and operate in a cleaner way. But that also has to be balanced with the cost, the impact that it will have on industries, the impact that it will have on public authorities' ability to deliver services. And so I would urge, as a result of the very frank conversations that we've had this evening and the admissions that we've had, the fact that a full cost analysis hasn't been carried out on this, my view would be that it needs to be reassessed as to whether 2030 is a suitable target or whether we should look to move to something that I would consider to be more realistic. Because if we proceed along this route without understanding the full cost implications of it, it could impact this authority's ability to deliver the core services it exists to provide. And that is something that we really can't afford to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I mean, I personally don't think that we have any choice but to go ahead with what we're planning on doing here. And this is a moving picture. We can see it's a moving picture from, you know, recent reports on how fast the Earth is heating up. It's defying all expectations. And there's never a question that we cannot not deliver the core services, because it's not either or, it's both, and it has to be both. Matt, you've come back in, so please, I'm interrupting. If you'd like to come back in.
I don't have anything to add to Councillor Carroll's further comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Lorna, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on that point, I think it's, I absolutely agree with you, Chair, insofar as we can't take our eye off the ball here. My personal view is, and it is a personal view, is if we move the goalpost, then that just gives us, you know, an opportunity not to do as much as we can do within the time frame. I would, personally prefer to have a 2030 goal and really go for it as far as we can within the resources available to us. But I understand perfectly the point that Councillor Carroll was making, and I don't, you know, I'm not delusional in any way that it is an incredibly hard task. And the other point that I just wanted to make is we do continue to seek grant funding wherever possible. We secured £250,000 of low carbon heat grant to decarbonise one of our major assets this financial year, and that project is nearing completion. And with the other assets collaboration programme funding that I mentioned earlier, we've secured in the last 2 years £655,000 worth of Welsh Government and UK Gov funding for this agenda. But you know, I perfectly take the point, and it is a well-made point. But I just think we need to just keep the focus on 2030 as long as possible, albeit, you know, it is going to be an incredibly difficult task. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. We do our best in terms of feeding back through to Welsh Gov and through our professional networks, and you know, things like CLAW, our energy and decarbonisation groups with CLAW, and through our forums with Ystad Cymru as well. So we do quite a bit of sort of engagement activity with Welsh Government officials. So I'm sure that the point is not lost on Welsh Gov as well. But thanks for the question. It's perfectly valid. Yeah.
Thank you, Lorna, and thank you, Councillor Carroll. I just wanted to make a positive comment, if I could, at this point, that we, a couple of months back, we, as part of our Task and Finish group, looking at how we can introduce social value and circular economy principles into how the Vale buys things, we had a face-to-face meeting with the buyers of the authority, and I was super impressed by the representative from the housing development team, not just with the knowledge that they were coming back with, but just what we're doing to make the properties from our built environment and also new build more thermal and energy efficient. They're not just going for the sort of stuff that we would ask for. It's, and they were really able to explain why putting solar panels on a roof is not the answer in some cases. So I wanted to make that clear, that I was, that their thanks, or my thanks rather, to them, and that I feel they deserve to have that. Councillor Johnson, would you like to come back in?
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. Just because we've turned to the debate about being ambitious, which was the purpose behind the 2030 target, Councillor Carroll referred to the discussion that we had as a council around this. This took place back in 2019, and if I remember correctly, Councillor Carroll suggested that we should target 2050 instead of 2030. Is this more realistic to achieve? Perhaps so. Is it too late? Absolutely. So the challenge that we have in hand is that halfway through the period between 2019 and 2030, we are here still sitting and discussing how we will attain the target. Disappointing is that we're still not entirely sure in terms of the methodology around carbon emissions and how much are taking place, that we're not making as much progress towards the target, and we're not approaching the target at any quick pace. And the challenge ahead of us is the lack of funding from government in London and in Cardiff for people to reach the levels that you would hope for, and also the lack of work towards creating capacity in order for the work to take place. Because, of course, if you're going to doing the retrofit work and so forth, you need people to be able to undertake that work. And we understand, of course, with the COVID pandemic and the cost of living crisis, where inflation has risen over the last couple of years, this has impacted the target. But in spite of this, we should continue to be ambitious, and we should still try and reach this as quickly as we can. In that vein, my main question is, how within this period, if the funding is in short supply, how exactly are we going to prioritize which projects we go ahead with? We heard, for example, in the previous item about community centres. So how will we set about, and perhaps this is for Matt or Lorna, how will we secure more funding within the council in order to implement this work? 50 million sounds like a lot of money in many ways, but this is then again 10% of the total of expenditure of the council in a year, because we spend some £500 million over that period. So this isn't that much of a sum, and we do spend over 10 million each year on our capital projects, which some 100 million this year on capital projects. So it's a large sum in some respects, but not in other respects. If I could just ask a specific methodological question. In the report that we have, there is reference made to emissions in 22-23. And there's one pie chart, figure 4, on page 18 or 27, depending which numbers you're using, but the pie chart suggests that scope 3 is 88%, which is scope 1, with emissions by the council, and 8% relating to the council or created by others. The next pie chart along, figure 5, puts supply chain or procurement as 78%, and then the rest as 12 or more than 12%, of course, between buildings, street lighting, and so forth. I was just trying to work out what the rest of the scope 3 figure is if procurement accounts for 78% and not 88%. Because it seemed to me that the two pie charts didn't quite align. So could someone explain the difference between the figures between the two pie charts? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So two questions really around the stats there, and also the priorities. How are we going to prioritise what we do? Anne, would you like to come in with that one? Is that okay? Oh no, we've got Matt. We've got both Anne and Matt.
I was just going to answer the first question around the funding and the spend, and in part, Lorna had answered that to some extent. What the council is doing is trying to prioritise its resources best it can. Whilst we do, as you're correct, Councillor Johnson, we have a £100 million capital programme, but that is largely funded by grant, capital receipts, and other contributions, with the council really not borrowing very much to be able to finance that, because the impact on its revenue budget. We do, as Laura has said, do seek out grants wherever we can, and that's probably our main strategy in this space at the moment.
So if I can just come in quickly on that, sorry, Chair. I mean, I appreciate, sort of the work of the council. I think the fundamental challenge is there's no point in having legislation like the Wellbeing, Future Generations, etc., if Welsh Government aren't going to actually foot the bill for the projects that they say we should really be looking towards doing. So fundamentally, sort of the buck stops with government in Cardiff and London, that if we're expected to be delivering net zero, whether it's through particularly in the council terms and through our scope 1 work, that money has to be funded from somewhere, and they can't wave their hands and say it's up to you.
And your second question, that's the one I would be grateful if Anne's able to step in and help me out on that one.
No problem, Matt. And thank you, Councillor Johnson, for the question and for looking at the data more closely. If I can encourage everybody to look at page 75 of 86 of the document, that's the submission that supported our 22-23 report into Welsh Government. There you can see how the activity is split out across scope 1, 2 and 3. So whilst our buildings activity is in the main scope 1 emissions, it does still have a shadow scope 3 associated with it as well. So I'm hoping in seeing that background, in that the tables on page 75, that helps to explain where there is that slight difference in the pie chart.
So just for clarification then, sorry, Anne. While our scope 3 is, sorry, the table's too small for you to actually read whilst speaking at the same time. But fundamentally, so 78% is coming from the procurement, and the other 10% is coming from buildings.
Buildings, street lighting, our fleet and equipment, also our business travel. So that's our staff commute, our home working footprint, and business travel is all scope 3 as well.
Okay. So those are things which you're not responsible for.
we are responsible for.
Sorry, I'm just giving a quick upgrade. Sorry, Chair. So I scope 3, I think scope 1 is what we're responsible for.
Directly responsible for.
Scope 2, I think, is things that which we utilise but are not inherently responsible for. And scope 3 is what falls outside of that. Our buildings fall outside. We're not just responsible for our buildings.
It's the grid and the energy that sits with our buildings. It's the reporting template is splitting that emission and bringing the emission in from scope 3 as well.
I won't.
I'm happy to catch up separately outside of this discussion if we can.
Yeah. Okay. Look at that.
Thank you for that response there. Councillor Hanks, would you like to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if anyone here in this meeting tonight could tell me how many pool cars the Vale have, and from that number of cars, how many are electric?
Approximately 10% of our fleet is EV at present. I know that a grant application was made in September to purchase an additional four vans, I believe. The issue with the fleet is the vehicle suitability and the supply chain, again, being able to deliver that in time to be put to use. We can provide more details in a follow-up action. If that's okay.
Yeah, that would be handy. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodjohn, would you like to ask your questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, first off, there's a bit of a problem at the moment with considering only the cost and not the benefit of any of the actions taken. At the end of the day, most of the proposals which will reduce our carbon emissions would also save us money in revenue terms. At the moment, looking at it from a forensic financial point of view, we are actually in an extremely good position capital-wise because we're able to get cheap loans from the Public Works Loan Board, and we have quite a significant amount of capital financing remaining within our budget. However, our revenue situation is dire, as it is for all of local government at the moment. Therefore, anything that we can do to use capital money in order to save us revenue funding is a positive thing for us to do. This means anything that improves the energy efficiency of our buildings, as we have time and time again, including anything that saves us water and gas. These are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we're talking about investing 50 million into our buildings. On the whole, this would save us money in the long term, and it's something that isn't really being considered enough. To some extent, we aren't appreciating that we can't afford not to do it, right? There needs to be significant transformation of our services, and sustainability has to be a key part of that. When we're talking about value for money, about what we buy, at the end of the day, people aren't considering the quality of the product, and if we have a better quality product that we buy, perhaps we have to buy less of it. There's also the consideration of the durability. If we have to buy something more often because we're buying the cheapest possible thing, then we're not getting best value for money, something that isn't considered well enough in our procurement services. So I would reject Councillor Carroll's opinion, and I would reject his proposal because at the end of the day, we need to be as quick and radical as we can within the resources that we have. And therefore, anything that leads us to as an ambitious a target that we can reasonably say is even possible is what we should be targeting for. With that aside, I want to ask about the specifics within the document. So, number one, I noticed that there is consideration to some extent of modal shift when it comes to travel and business travel. There are some good actions in there. What I saw was lacking is actually something that is often the cheapest way for any organization to reduce its emissions, which is to modal shift the way that our employees travel to work. Although there's good consideration of hybrid working, the more that we can get our own employees to use public transport, particularly I'm thinking of bus services, the more that we can justify the expansion and preventing cuts in our bus services, especially in places like the rural Vale. I'm thinking Western Vale in particular here, where the more that we can get people using bus services, the more that we can justify spending money as a council, but also pushing Adventure Travel, Cardiff Bus, and all the bus companies that we have within the Vale to expand routes and expand service. So there was a lack of any action in modal shift towards public transport for our employees. So I'll start off there. What consideration has there been for getting employees to use public transport? I know there has been with e-bikes, but any thoughts on that would be helpful.
Thank you for your question. Your question sits within Chapter 7, and I think that's an example of a new collaborative area of work. We're looking to work with, that's a discussion amongst several different directorates, as well as obviously securing buy-in from members of staff to attend work, commute differently, and look at those modal shifts that you've suggested. Positive, you've already made reference to the bikes, and we've just in the past week had confirmation that the Cycle to Work scheme is going to become a permanent staff benefit, and also we're looking to claim the site business mileage for cycling. For claiming bike miles travelled as business travel will be changing as well. In terms of promoting bus usage, that would be a question I'd need to take away and bring a response back to, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If I can have a follow-up, the second thing I wanted to focus on, and any information would be helpful, is to do with procurement. I think we've discussed this time and time again, and we have the task and finish group that we're going through, but I think that there has been, and we've talked about this before, Matt, and your work regarding procurement, there's a lot of tactics around how we're going to improve the way that we report and improve awareness within our buyers within the organization of carbon when they're considering what they're buying. But at the end of the day, I don't see an overall strategy when it comes to the timeline of where do we want to be in 5 years in our procurement when it comes to carbon. All we have is the current position, and to some extent there's positives to that of flexibility, and I don't want to take that away because it means that depending on how well we're able to progress with improving our procurement situation, that does mean we're able to adjust the changes in the plan over time, but it also means that we aren't being quite as ambitious I think we could be. Within this plan, there's no targets. There's a lot of reliance on Ardle, which I've criticised before is not the solution to all of our problems, although it's certainly a positive step when it comes to buying in coordination with other local authorities. But any kind of information that you can give around how you're planning in the future to strategize a bit more in when are we going to require more carbon targets, how are we going to support the people, our suppliers when it comes to reporting that, and any resources that would be available to us to look about what you're targeting when it comes to strengthening what we're looking for in our procurement requirements in the future, would be good to see. I know that's less of a question and more of a comment, but any information about the strategy would be helpful. Anyone who wants to answer, but I'm particularly looking at Matt there, yeah.
So, and you're right, we've had a number of conversations about this, haven't we? It is a tough one, as are many of the areas of this plan. We did, as a council, put a new policy and strategy, procurement policy and strategy in place middle of last year. That sets out requirements for officers in the council when they go into procurement and the sort of suppliers we should be working with. I guess what I'm going to be saying to some extent is that we've got multiple strategies around this, and yes, we maybe should be pulling it all together in one place. Where we've with our partner Ardle, we've put guidance round to colleagues around carbon, and we've had a couple of sessions with colleagues on that as well. We're currently with Ardle doing a piece of work with RAP and looking specifically at carbon reduction in the supply chain for catering, highways, and social care. So it's just keeping it at the forefront of our minds and taking every opportunity we can at the moment is the general approach. I did as a sort of finance type person, I do like a target, and I would like to put a supply chain target in here. It's been but really impossible to actually put a meaningful one in, and it did take soundings from a number of colleagues in other organisations around their stance on it, and they're in a similar position to ourselves, which I know well, both you and I will find unsatisfactory.
I think that's totally fair, but anything that we can do to strengthen the long-term considerations we're making when it comes to procurement, what we're looking for in 5-10 years that is missing at the moment, would be good as a comment to go back. And also any information after the meeting that Anne can provide regarding modal shift when it comes to public transport for employees would be great. So thank you both.
Thank you for that, Councillor Good-John. It won't surprise anybody on this committee that I am quite positive about the potential that procurement can bring. It's an enabler, it's not a blocker. And I'm sure that the relationship with Ardle, with their expertise, is going to help us with our strategy. And any collaborative purchasing is also something that we need to look at. For our buyers, and actually going even further back, it's our commissioning officers who we also need to have conversations with to help them understand when they are putting specifications together, whether it's for services or products or works, exactly how they can make those specifications greener and more circular, and to also include in that core specification the end of life of something and what's going to happen when we don't need it anymore, whether it's a second life, to avoid anything going into landfill. And these are new things. These are new things for, just for the procurement expertise itself. We've spent an awful lot of time concentrating on what we think we need rather than what we want, but we haven't ever really taken the time to think about what is going to happen when we don't need it anymore. And that's becoming something that now we all have to take on board. So I'm quite positive that the future isn't quite so bleak on that front. At least it doesn't have to be. Before we move on to Lorna and also to the leader who will sum up for us today, I just wanted to ask a question really about, and it's something that Councillor Johnson has already touched upon, and that is priorities. So my question is, at the moment, when we look at a project, when we look at a proposal for spending money on a net zero project, are we actually considering the potential CO2 emissions saved in order to secure the funding? Is that something that we do, or is it something that we could potentially do to help us when we are prioritising where we spend our money? Thank you.
Thank you. This is certainly an area within property that we're increasingly looking at. One of our the next policy we're looking to bring through is looking at moving away from our reliance on gas and shifting towards heat pumps and electric sources of heating. And just today, the WLGA and Ambition North Wales held their first training provision around business case development with a focus on carbon and the biodiversity agendas. They felt that they've tested some methodologies that enhance the Green Book procurement rules. There's a second session taking place on the 27th of November next week, and I've signposted that to colleagues via the Project Zero team as well. So I'll continue to encourage that thinking and approach to expand our business case development process.
Thank you, Anne. That's good. And my last question then, before I hand over to Lorna, it's something that we probably all know and understand, that the best way to cut our carbon emissions is to use less and to change our behaviours, whether that is how we work, how we live, what we do, what we choose to buy, and what we specify in what we buy. So I'm just wondering, and we have lots of different categories that we're focusing on, but do we have a focus yet, a focus study of the potential of the contributions changing behaviour could have across all of these? Because I'm thinking it might be something that would help us to sort of like focus on that, on a topic on its own, changing behaviour. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah. I'm afraid the short answer, Candid, is we don't have that behaviour change quantified. As such, I think the discussions we've had already about the investor save and the revenue benefits that will come, the decarbonisation agenda can't be kept in isolation. It does align to the transformation work that we're looking to do and reshaping our services. So I think we are fortuitously at a time where the corporate plan is in development and review, at the same time as this decarbonisation carbon management plan is going through for approval as well.
You're not on screen, Chair.
I do apologise. I was just asking Lorna, she has a hand up. Is it a legacy hand, or did she want to come back in? No? Can I ask the leader, Councillor Burnett, to come in then to sum up for us? Here she is. Thank you.
I hadn't planned. Lorna, did you?
Oh, Lorna's back.
Apologies for schoolgirl error. I forgot to press the big red button right in front of me. So if the leader is happy for me to do so, just a really quick point, if I may, and it goes back to Councillor Goodjohn's point about the cap versus revenue position, and it's a very well made point, and I guess it goes back to the business as usual stance that we're taking at the moment in respect of capital bid processes. When we're looking at service requests for capital for roof renewals of assets within portfolios, automatically we look now at if that roof is getting renewed, the PV is going up as well. If it's capable, if there's an opportunity to do so. So that business as usual activity is quite well embedded in the bidding process at the moment. It's also worth just noting that access to the Project Zero reserves requires a pro forma to be completed for review by the individual SRO, which is a senior responsible officer, and Tom will. The director of the corporate resources will be reviewing that on the project board, and there's specific asks for the contribution of any capital or revenue contributions, what contribution to Project Zero ambitions are going to be made out of that process. So, any funding that comes through either the capital project bidding process or through Project Zero requires those considerations to be taking place. So that really has embedded that process. And one of the other questions asked specifically about the contribution to our carbon target. So it's fair to say that whilst we are in a very challenging position around our capital side, without that capital input, then our revenue is going to be in a much more difficult position. So I totally endorse the comment made by Councillor Goodjohn. So thank you, thanks for the opportunity. And sorry, Leader.
Thank you, Lorna. Leader, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna. So I hadn't planned to speak this evening, but it's been a really interesting discussion, and it took me back. In fact, to July 2019, where I was delighted to take the motion to declare a climate emergency to full council, and we were one of the first councils in the UK to declare a climate emergency. I think if we had backed off at that time and gone with the suggestions from some that we go to 2050, it would have been very easy in the intervening years, wouldn't it, to kick the can down the road, particularly when we have been subject to such fierce budget constraints. But I think it's the right thing to have been ambitious. It's the right thing to say, we might not get it there, we might not hit it, but we won't stop trying. And I think it's fair also to say there's been a lot of learning by all local authorities in Wales, and we share that learning. We know that there's not a lot of point using an electric refuse vehicle when you're in a very hilly environment. It doesn't work. We know that now, so we're probably going to have to look at other areas. That wasn't us, by the way, but it was another local authority. Historically, if you look at sustainable development, it looks at social, economic and environmental factors. And obviously in recent years, environmental has come to the fore, but it still is a bit of that triangle, and we have to achieve a balance within the Vale because we have to provide services to our residents. And I think what I would say for us as we go forward over the next few months, that's going to mean budget choices. And as we bring the budget forward, those are the things that we need to be discussing about. What are the priorities of this council? How do we manage to achieve the right balance, and a balance that also reflects the motion that the council passed in terms of zero carbon? It is difficult. We've got, suppliers are not necessarily skilled up in this area, so we have to work with them, and we have to also hopefully provide opportunities for them to upskill as well, so we can do that. But I think that I also have to say a huge thank you to everyone in the Vale who's played a part in this. One of the big things we've achieved is our second in Wales rather recycling success, which is, if Wales is the second in the world, we're pretty well up there, aren't we? And that is, we can support our residents to do that by providing facilities, etc. But it is our residents that achieved a 72% recycling target, and for that we have to be hugely thankful. And there are so many other things, for every person that chooses to catch a bus rather than get the car out of the garage, for every person that walks or cycles, walks their children to school rather than getting the car out. You know, that is a big thank you. Even the people that do, when we plant trees, that go out every day and water those trees so they don't die. It might seem little, but those actions by the people in the Vale all add to us achieving that. And I know from talking to people that is, it matters so much to them as well. So, Chair, if I could just, say that we will not achieve zero carbon unless we all work together, unless we work together across the council, which we are doing, but also unless individuals, organisations, communities across the Vale also work with us towards that target. And for every step they take with us, a huge thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Okay, I think we've had a really good debate on the carbon management plan. I don't see any other hands, so I think I'll just move us on, if that's okay, and go to the recommendations. That was basically that this committee has considered the plan, and any of our comments will be referred back to Cabinet for their consideration. There's quite a lot of comments here. I'm wondering if they can go collectively, if that's not too much work, Karen, for you. Hopefully it's okay.
I agree, Chair. If we are going to put the comments, we do really need to be making recommendations, mind. You know, we need to be very clear in what we're saying. So I just wondered if you wanted to make some of those comments as recommendations, and I can put them together. Suggested recommendations.
I think if we can recommend that we focus on the behaviour change, and also looking at how we can spend a little bit more time looking at that, that would be really helpful, because I truly believe that is a key to this, especially when we don't have the money. I think most of everything else have just been questions that we've asked, and we've had really good responses. I don't think there was anything specifically that we are recommending other than that, unless anybody from committee wants to remind me of something that they think is a really important recommendation. Thank you. But I see no hands. So if we can move on this one, and we'll move on to the next one. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And seconder, Councillor Hang. Thank you, everybody. If we move now on to agenda item 6. 6. So that's a report of the Director of Corporate Resources. This report has come from the Wells Centre for Public Policy. It is a report that Vice Chair Councillor Goodjohn has requested for us. So that's we have him to thank for this one. Thank you. And it's our response to the Vale of Glamorgan Council Management Plan 2024-2030. I think we've got Tom Bowring first. He's going to do a quick introduction. And we're very grateful to have Dr. Price from the Welsh Centre for Public Policy, who is also here to support us. Lorna?
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, I'll just do the quick introduction on behalf of
great. Yeah,
that's okay.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as the Chair alluded to, the report reflects a consideration of the report that we have been asked to look at by the WCPP. They were asked to undertake a review of the Council's Carbon Management Plan 2024 to 2030 by Councillor Goodjohn in his role as Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Committee. The responses provided by WCPP in their role as independent and non-partisan evidence centre as part of the work programme for public services in Wales with regard to the environment and net zero priority area. The review findings is set out in Appendix A to the report. The Vice Chair requested WCPP to consider the carbon management plan as a whole, and with specific reference to a number of key questions, such as, is the document realistic within budget set? Is the document ambitious enough? We've already had that discussion around ambitions to reach net zero by 2030, and if not, what additional actions are required to meet net zero by 2030? How can the council engage better to ensure citizens' voices are better heard during the decarbonisation process? So as well as assisting in the scrutiny of the council's plan, the WCPP report also provides a list of relevant publications by that organisation for further information for members' information. It's recommended the committee consider this report and the appendix alongside the reference from Cabinet and refer any comments to Cabinet for the consideration. And it's also recommended that committee extend their thanks to WCPP for their valuable input into the process. Chair, I would like to bring in Anne Sharp also, who is going to set out by way of a quick PowerPoint presentation with your approval, and that's the council's response to the WCPP report. So, Chair, if you're happy for us to do that first, and then we'll take any questions if that's okay.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Anne.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure. Does Dr. Price have a presentation to provide first before I respond?
Dr.
Otherwise,
Price,
I'm happy to continue.
Yeah. Would you? Do you have a presentation, or are you here to take questions? So would it work for you to speak first, or for Anne to speak? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to briefly talk through the response document that we provided. It would be useful.
That's great. Thank you ever so much.
Yeah, thank you. So as we've been introduced, we were asked to look at the carbon management plan by Councillor Goodjohn. The WCPP, of which I'm a part, is an independent evidence centre based at Cardiff University. We're funded by the Welsh Government, by the Economic and Social Research Council, and by Cardiff University. And our mission is to help policymakers in Wales to access and use the best available evidence to help them to tackle their needs and the policy challenges that they're working on. So we work with the Welsh Government on a range of commissioned projects and work programmes, and we also have a largely self-generated work programme with the wider Welsh public services, including local authorities, PSBs, and a number of other bodies that we've worked with in the past. So the response that we provided really draws on a range of evidence that we've developed over the course of those work programmes. The overall impression that we had, I think it's fair to say, and is reflected in the document, is that we think the actions are realistic, that they are a well thought through series of actions which intend to reduce the organisational emissions across scopes 1, 2 and 3. The first sort of caveat to that is around costings. While we recognise what officers have said tonight and what is reflected in the document around the difficulty of providing costings, we do feel that these should be developed and worked on where possible. There's a number of reasons for this. Firstly, it's obviously beneficial to know how much a programme of work will cost, but also if you're looking to secure external funding or grant funding, business case development is always much easier when you have a fully costed programme set out. And we think this is particularly relevant to raise at this point because the strategy document reflects, and again we've heard this tonight, the costs of inaction. So not only is there a carbon cost to inaction, there's also a financial cost associated with inaction, in that the effects of climate change, which are of course starting to happen now, will become more severe as time goes on and will cost more to mitigate, and adaptation will also cost more further down the line. So all other things being equal, spending money now likely will reduce costs at a later date compared to spending money later. The question of whether the document is ambitious enough to reach net zero by 2030, we think this is unclear. We're not sure whether the 2030 target is going to be achieved by the actions set out in the document. There's a number of reasons for this. Scope 2 emissions are going to be difficult to directly reduce, and they depend largely on the success of the UK government in decarbonising electricity generation. Scope 1 emissions are a sensible focus for reduction because they are ones within the direct control of the organisation. But again, as is highlighted in the document, there are specific challenges around financing and resourcing the actions needed to reduce those emissions. And with Scope 3, there are foreseeable difficulties in persuading suppliers and other organisations to reduce their emissions. Ultimately, that is something that requires persuasion rather than mandated action. The fundamental point about Scope 1 around cost is that capital budgets aren't necessarily there. We recognise this as a problem across local authorities in Wales and within the Welsh Government as well. I should say that the capital budget that exists isn't necessarily there to support this programme of work at the moment. We know that there are a number of competing priorities within capital expenditure, and we know that external funding, while it can be secured, isn't always at the moment in the right place to be able to fully support those costs. So there's a risk associated with that. There's also a risk associated with internal resource and capacity to undertake actions. We think that's a very important thing that should be considered throughout this process. Internal resource is needed to facilitate project management, to be able to secure and manage external funding contracts, to be able to ensure that projects are run to time and to cost, and in order to develop and deploy policies and strategies to secure decarbonisation. So a strong reflection from us is that that internal organisational resource should be secured where it exists now, developed further where it doesn't, and protected as far as possible against further job losses, cuts, recognising, of course, the very difficult financial situation that local authorities find themselves in at the moment. There's a lot of positivity around procurement, around the Ardell partnership and the council proposing carbon reduction plans for Scope 3 emissions. We do also recognise capacity challenges within the procurement, so any movement on this front we think should be incorporated into day-to-day work programmes as far as possible, protected in terms of capacity to actively manage and collect and report the data on that. There are hurdles to be overcome here as well. There is a risk in terms of making those requirements that the sorts of businesses that are able to incorporate that into their contracts and their bidding may not be the ones that offer that added social value, offer that sort of local procurement. We're thinking particularly of the SME part of that sector, because we recognise, and again in Wales, across Wales, the SME sector tends to be very small, tends not to have the capacity internally to do these things. So there are actions that could potentially be taken to support them to develop a carbon monitoring and accounting framework for their business, which again is an upfront investment but would reflect savings further down the line. There's also the point, which has been raised a couple of times already by councillors, that many businesses and broader society will be preparing for a 2050 net zero target, and there is going to be the potential for some conflict there, where there's a 2030 council target. So there is the potential for that to complicate things as well. Now, we do think what that adds up to is that the balance of emissions in 2030 is unlikely to be zero. Some degree of offset is going to be required to hit the target. And this is particularly true because other forms of mitigation, such as carbon capture and storage or direct air capture, are really not likely to be commercially viable or mature enough on the market to be deployed at scale by 2030. That all sounds like rather bad news, I know, but the second part of the document is really us trying to provide some examples of types of intervention or ways of working that could help to accelerate the transition and hopefully meet that 2030 ambition. So one of those is around alternative funding sources. In our recent report that we did with the WLGA on a local authority-led transition to net zero, we looked in some detail at innovative finance and different forms of accessing that finance, which could be used by local authorities where possible with case studies. One example of that is local climate bonds, which would be a type of bond issued by a local authority to its citizenry, intended to be purchased by the citizenry, which have been explored by the Green Finance Institute, among others, and could be a viable way of securing investment, particularly where there could be an expected service or community benefit from that investment. There are also movements on the UK level in terms of the National Wealth Fund, as was, I think it's been rebadged now, which could also be tapped into. We recognise that private finance is an option. It's unlikely to be attractive for Scope 1 capital expenditure, but could be considered for other large-scale projects, particularly ones that align with the broader societal net zero target. So the emissions out with the council's direct Scope 1 responsibility, also potentially outside of Scope 2 and 3, but which nonetheless affect the emissions within the local area and ultimately align with the 2050 target. There is a case for prioritising action depending on where the most benefit could be realised. So looking at buildings specifically, it may be the case that taking a fabric first approach, so energy efficiency upgrades prioritised over other forms of intervention, are not always the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions from buildings, particularly for existing buildings. In new buildings, that can be built in, of course, to the development process, but for existing buildings, we think that installing low or zero carbon heat sources is generally a more cost-effective and preferable way to reduce emissions in the first instance. There's also the prospect of pooling smaller projects with neighbouring authorities, which could be done through the ARDL scheme. It could be done through other forms of partnership working. Fleet decarbonisation is one example of this that we refer to in that report, where pooling across a number of authorities could increase economies of scale and ultimately reduce the cost of that programme of work while supporting the 2030 target. There's a number of other points that we make in that section as well, and that I won't run through now, but I will sort of refer you to the report to consider further around planning and around protecting internal resource and capacity. And then the final point that we considered was around engagement. We are keen to stress that public buy-in for the transition is really a crucial part of reaching net zero, not just to accelerate the transition and not just to enable community action, but also to avoid public backlash and resistance. One thing that we think will be particularly important on that front is to ensure that the public maintain, preserve, enhance a sense of agency, control over their own lives, particularly important in areas where there is already some degree of public controversy, such as agriculture, land use. Buy-in should be achieved as early as possible in any part of the transition, and policy should be implemented with the flexibility to change certain areas if those are compromising the public support for them. Now, in terms of engagement in general, we've identified 3 principles of successful engagement. One is that it starts early in the project development phase. So as soon as the project is announced, that there are opportunities for the public to contribute to and influence those plans. It needs to be genuinely participatory. It needs to involve as wide a swathe of society as possible. It needs to incorporate the views of as many residents, stakeholders, and other groups as it can. And it has a meaningful impact on plans. So it isn't just consultation for consultation's sake, but it is something which can genuinely shape and change the project that's being proposed and how that's delivered. Now, we recognise a lot of these things are ideal case scenarios. A lot of them are very resource intensive, but we do feel that within the current financial envelope, by looking at more innovative financing methods, by looking at investing now to save later, there are things which can be done to support the acceleration of the transition, and doing so in a meaningful and participatory way. To sort of close my initial contribution here, I would like to just sort of say that the reports that we've referenced, hopefully there are within those things which could be useful to you as councillors and to officers within the council in supporting their decision making. We have an ongoing programme of work in this area with projects being scoped now, and we'd be more than happy to engage with any and all of you sort of outside of the scope of this meeting as well, if that would be useful.
Thank you ever so much for that, Dr. Price, and thank you for coming today as well. Appreciate your time. It's been really, really helpful. I think committee, before we ask any questions of Dr. Price, we'll bring Anne in and she can give the officer's response to the report, if that's okay. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Dr. Price and Chair. Just a very few short set of slides. Which are hopefully now sharing with you all.
Yes, Anne, they're on screen.
Thank you. Many of the points have been discussed in the earlier discussion or in Dr. Price's summary of the report. Ambition, I feel we've already covered well. In terms of the project, I think there is that element that we still need to do the baseline option and to update some of our policies to look at that investment into low carbon options. So that's sort of changing our business as usual, and the reactive model perhaps in some areas of business and making that much more of proactive mechanism. We've got ongoing training around the procurement and awareness, and I think that's a large area that's already been well discussed tonight. And we are continuing to seek grants, certainly within the property team. We're aware that the low carbon heat grant is entering its third and final year. We're not aware of what Welsh Government's commitments are beyond March 26 to this agenda. And there are other grants available supporting the fleet at the moment, but limited beyond that as well. And we are looking at other funding models, some of which Dr. Price has touched on, but other aspects that might become a more participatory model in the future as well. In terms of our fleet, there's a lot of collaboration happening in this space already. We are working and learning from local authorities that have tested other vehicles to and models to those that we've been able to purchase and put to use ourselves. We're participating in the Infuse programme with the Cardiff Capital Region, and I think that's a lot of collaboration across all public sector bodies. That's bringing some interesting learning as well. We are procuring the vehicles and making use of the economies of scale. Welsh Government carried out a procurement exercise last year, I believe. Continuing to secure and grow the EV fleet. I understand this is limited to the availability and the options that are fit for purpose in doing so. And as part of our transformation agenda, we are looking at the operating models, both how we book and use the pool cars across the council, and also the contracts that we hold with others, for example, our school transport. I understand from colleagues that our current providers aren't yet looking at or able to fund a switch to low carbon options within their business models themselves. In terms of our planning, we've touched on we've already made reference to the excellent work colleagues have been doing in our new housing development delivery, and I'm pleased to say that that's already aligning well to the proposals that our planning team are coming up with for our replacement local development plan. The planning team are also leading on our local area energy plan, and there's large societal 2050 agenda and changes to the decarbonisation agenda within that work as well. And obviously the carbon management plan is just one part of the Project Zero challenge plan and our wider commitment to decarbonise both for 2030 for our corporate activities and then beyond wider with wider society for 2050. That brings to close the response I wanted to give. Time for discussion now, Chair, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that too. I have a couple of questions too, but I'm going to first of all open up to other members first. Councillor Franks, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. I was intrigued to hear that there might be alternative funding sources, and I can say fairly safely that the Treasury will stop all such initiatives. They don't like losing control of money, and they will not go down that road unless there's evidence to the contrary. I'm grateful for Mr. Price for his comments, and I consider his words were very careful and nuanced. But as far as I can see, who distill it, basically it's shot to pieces the whole of the veiled strategy regarding this matter. And I must say, I couldn't fully grasp the contribution of the leader, which seemed to focus on asking residents to water trees. Perhaps I missed some other key points. So basically, I have very little confidence that that the public will have any faith in any consultation process. So again, this undermines the strategy that we have been advised to employ. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. And of course, this is a respectful debate and we all are entitled to our opinions. I would just like to draw your attention to the response and the very first comment, actually, which is that on the whole, the actions proposed in the document appear realistic and reflect a well thought through series of actions intended to reduce organisation operational emissions across scopes 1, 2 and 3. That's their very first opening line. So I think, as I said, we can respectfully disagree on it. And of course, they are trying to highlight the difficulties any authority will have in something which is a moving picture anyway. So I think it's a balanced report, and I think it's only fair that I just make that comment. And you've come back in, so please
Yes,
let me.
well, I hope I was being respectful.
You were, and you absolutely were.
Well,
but I just need to say that.
I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. Anne, would you like to come back in?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make reference to the work we've been able to do with Ystad Cymru with the decarbonisation grants. So we worked with 3 community centres last year and are scoping out the centres that we'll be working with on receipt of this year's grant. I think it's been very interesting to see what that has then enabled with the operational savings that have come to those sites, and sort of the ripple effect and benefit that does bring to the local community. So I think that the participation is starting in this area, and I know I've been discussing other funding opportunities with colleagues within the council. So I'll follow those discussions up offline with Matt, and if we're able to provide an update to Cabinet or Scrutiny, then we'll do so in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Anne. And as well, I think part of the report actually did emphasise what we have been discussing today, and that is that this is not something that we as a council are going to be able to do on our own. We have to do it with our communities. And I was really interested to read about local climate bonds. So I'd like us as an authority to look into that a little bit more, if that's possible. And also reflecting on the working with our communities on this. I'd like to also propose that as we are in the western part of the Vale, in the St Bride's ward, we're going to be holding a climate conversation with our residents in the new year to talk with them about what they would like to see in this particular area, and also to help them understand what the council's already working on. And I think it might be an idea, as we're all, active councillors in our areas, that we consider doing this across all of our wards as a starter, if the council would like to support that kind of work throughout the Vale. I can see Councillor Goodjohn's also got his hand up, and so has Councillor Cowell. But Anne, would you like to come back in on those 2 points I've made? Thank you.
Thank you. The events you've described sound really beneficial, and I can't speak on behalf of all officers, but I'm sure between certainly Property and Project Zero, hopefully we could contribute and support. You can remind me on the second point, please.
Apologies, Chair, you're not on screen.
Sorry, everybody. So it was the local climate bonds, Anne.
Local climate bonds.
Yeah,
I'm afraid that's not a finance model I'm aware of, and something that we will need to investigate further. I've been looking at some. I'll follow up with Matt offline, and we'll provide a response.
That's great.
In due course, if that's okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Goodjohn, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just want to definitely support everything that you've said earlier. I would point to the Youth Climate Conversations event that we held. I think it was October of last year, if I'm not mistaken, which was really positive. And the more climate conversation events we can have, the more ideas it feeds into the council, which can only improve and expedite our move towards net zero, and also improves understanding and engagement with the public. So any more of that we can do is extremely positive, and I think well worth the money. I would just like to ask Dr. Price a couple of questions. Firstly, regarding planning, which I know is one of the points within the document that he raised. If he could go into some more detail about what the local authority could do regarding the planning department to expedite decision making and also to save money for the council and for applicants when it comes to renewable energy and low carbon projects. That would be really interesting to hear what we could do, which isn't already being considered by Welsh Government, because I know that they're coming out with new plans very soon to expedite those kind of projects. So anything we can do on our end, and also anything that we're not already doing as part of the new local development plan. I'm sure there is plenty that isn't being considered. The other main thing is the financial side being taken seriously, and I think this is a question for Matt. I would back up what the chair has said about climate bonds. We need to look at new finance models when it comes to financing capital, but also revenue when it comes to decarbonisation. Will the council be taking seriously and looking into all of the suggestions made in the WCPP report? So yeah, 2 questions for 2 different people.
Yeah, I note your continued comments about the finances, and we are taking them seriously. We're looking to the bonds, of course. Worth reminding people, though, any form of borrowing is a financial liability on the council and would need to appear in our balance sheet. So these are certainly worth exploring, but they aren't for free.
Thank you, Matt. Dr. Price, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Just in response to an earlier point from Councillor Franks, I think there's room to be a little bit more optimistic about what the Treasury will or won't tolerate on this front. So the Green Finance Institute, who are the organisation which developed the local climate bond idea, are also quite heavily involved in the National Wealth Fund, which of course was set up recently. So there's scope to believe that there might be a slightly more tolerant environment for this sort of experimentation than perhaps there has been historically. In terms of the planning question from Councillor Goodjohn, councillors will be aware of the infrastructure bill, which has passed through the Senate now, I believe, which aims to sort of set up a one-stop shop for large-scale infrastructure projects in Wales that parallels developments elsewhere in the UK and abroad. We generally think there's value in trying to streamline as many parts of the planning process as possible in terms of the permitting and consenting process. So where there's scope to do so, and we may find that with recent Welsh Government announcements, there becomes slightly more scope to do so. Certain things can be done either on a unified basis across planning authorities and with sort of external stakeholders, Natural Resources Wales, things like that. And or things can be done in advance of the formal planning process. So one case study, and this will really require national action, but is worth mentioning because it has been so effective. One case study that we've reflected on in parts of our work is an example from the Netherlands, were to increase their offshore wind capacity. They developed a process by which all of the necessary permitting, consenting, grid connections, and indeed the location and size of a project were all carried out by the government in advance of any sort of formal tendering process. So by the point at which a developer got the chance to bid for a project, they knew that that was essentially a shovel-ready project and thing to do. Now, that sort of thing has been really effective. It has been really effective in the Netherlands. It would require some action at a national level, but anything that can approximate that and can approach the sorts of ambitions that are in the infrastructure bill/act and sort of match the rhetoric around planning that we're seeing at a sort of UK national level as well would be really beneficial. And of course, as I say, with recent Welsh Government announcements, there was a chance that that could be a more relevant factor soon.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Price. Councillor Carroll, you have your hand up. Please come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's not so much a question, but more an observation, actually, because there was quite considerable pushback from the committee to the comments I made in relation to the last agenda item, which was simply whether the 2030 target was realistic and whether it would be wiser to reevaluate it to set a target that was more sustainable. Now, this report is quite conclusive. It doesn't appear that the authority is on track to meet that target, and it doesn't appear as though it's anywhere close. So I would only really like to take this opportunity to reiterate the point that I made. This isn't about pretending there isn't an issue with carbon emissions. This isn't me saying that we shouldn't be working proactively to reduce carbon emissions. But I would emphasise once again, this needs to be done in a pragmatic way. We do need to assess the costs and the impacts that the current targets we've set may be having on the authority's ability to deliver its services. And so I think it would be helpful at the very least to have that discussion rather than pretend that we're not on course to meet those targets when clearly from this report that isn't the case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. And again, I'm going to respectfully disagree with some of those comments, because I don't think anyone is under any illusion that this is a done deal and that we absolutely know for sure exactly what we need to do and how much it's going to cost to get to net zero by 2030. I'm not even sure, though, which is why I'm interjecting, that the report, the question, is the document ambitious enough to reach net zero by 2030? And the response, it isn't clear that the actions identified will suffice to reach net zero. It doesn't say that it won't, because it isn't clear. So I just wanted to make that point. And of course, you are entitled to your opinion too. Okay, do we have any other questions for Dr. Price or for indeed Anne on this report? Okay, no, that's fine. Can I just thank you again then, Dr. Price, for coming? It's really appreciated that you've given us your time today and for the work of the policy unit on the report. It is helpful, and this committee and also this authority has taken what you've had and is appreciative of the guidance. So thank you very much. If we can move on then, committee, to the recommendations, if that's okay. I think Laura said it at the beginning, but I'll quickly run through them. That was that we consider the report in Appendix A alongside the reference from Cabinet relating to the CMP. We consider the response from the officers, that was Appendix B, made to the WCCP report, we refer our comments to Cabinet on this report for their consideration, and that we extend thanks to Dr. Price, obviously, for attending tonight, and to the Policy Unit for their consideration of the CMP. Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's I support all of those recommendations, but I would add to that a specific point regarding what Dr. Price was talking about with the planning department. I think that's something that needs specific looking into. I would recommend Cabinet have a look into that. The other thing I would say is I'm not fully satisfied yet that we're properly looking into the possibilities of alternative funding models. So if we could ask Cabinet to look into that as well, I would be deeply appreciative. If any other members have anything else they would also like to highlight, I think that would also be a good idea.
Yeah, so the additional recommendations are that committee wish that we could to refer to Cabinet the recommendation that we look at the alternative options of financing that climate bonds represent, if that's possible, that there are some additional possibilities with planning considerations that the report refers to, also to make that clear. We want Cabinet to also look into those. And also just to add good measure, if they could also consider whether holding climate conversation events across the ward to speak with our residents, let residents know what we're doing as a council, and also to see how they feel about their contribution and what we need to look at in their specific area. So there were a couple of additional recommendations. If committee are happy with those, can we have a hand to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. That's great. We'll move on then quickly, if that's possible, to our presentation. Karen, you've come into the room.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Can I just suggest, Chair, that with regard to the agenda now, that we take the next report from Audit Wales, the Audit Wales report, as we have officers from Audit Wales here. And I'm just wondering, because I don't know how long we're going to carry on, it would be nice if we could actually do that item first, if committee and yourself are happy to do so.
That's considerate, and I should have thought of that too, because we have been debating for nearly 2.5 hours. And also I should also ask of committee, does anybody want to have a break? We could do that now, or we could do so after audits reports. How does everybody feel? Nobody said anything, so I think we'll just continue as we are, then, if that's okay. Can we move then to the what would be agenda item 8, but we're jumping now and putting it to agenda item 7. So that's our Audit Wales Financial Sustainability Review of the Vale of Glamorgan County Council. This is a director's report from Corporate Resources. And I think we've got Tom. Have we got Tom to take us through this? No, we've got Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Never mind, you've got me, Chair.
That's great. Thank you.
I'm aware of time, so I'll just give it a fairly brief intro. But as you'll see from the report, this is a thematic review covering all 22 Welsh councils, with initial reports specific to individual councils, and then a later report to cover all of Wales. Our report was finalised in early September, and the national report is expected in early December. Naturally, we wanted to bring our report to you in a timely manner, which is why it's on the agenda today, and then we'll bring the national one forward to a later date, probably very early in the new year, I would imagine. It was a fairly in-depth piece of work, commenced back in March. We had initial discussion with Audit Wales on the brief, and then we completed the documentary evidence request. There was quite a volume of evidence that we brought forward: budget reports, monitoring reports, reshaping reports, budget working groups, benchmarking, training presentations to members and the workforce, also that we shared with Audit Wales in early April. That was followed up with interviews with myself, the Chief Executive and the leader in late April, early May. We had the draft report in July, and that was finalised towards the end of August. following which we also agreed our management response. So quite a thorough process. There are no real surprises in the report, and we are content with the recommendations. We did, however, raise with the team that some further context would have been helpful, with Welsh authorities on a succession of one-year funding settlements from UK and then Welsh Government, which of course don't really support effective financial planning. The council's budget setting, whilst attempting to recognise all pressures across the medium-term financial plan, only typically balances in year one. And we're naturally attempting to move on to the front foot with a reshaping programme and have a more fully populated plan. We also recognise that performance and finance are on different reporting cycles and have actions in place to bring the two together. We have had, we did have existing plans to start including non-financial data in our quarterly revenue monitoring reports. And you'll see this when the Q2 report comes to you in December. So that's all I was going to say as a brief intro. I'm not sure if Gemma wants to come and say a few words then. Or Charles even.
Thank you. We've got Charles. Thank you, Charles. Please go ahead.
Thanks. So thanks, Matt. I hardly need to add anything to that. I think just to before I get into the report, just to thank Matt, Tom, and the colleagues that Matt mentioned there for their support during the field work for this review. If we turn to the report, just for members that have been part of the council for previous rounds of reporting, this is the third time Audit Wales has completed a piece of financial sustainability work in the 22 councils. This report is different in focus. It's supposed to be greater emphasis on being forward-looking and coping with the challenges that are in front of councils rather than necessarily looking back, which has been a greater focus in the past. And as Matt mentioned, this is a kind of a two-phase approach. We're doing the local reports, which very much focus on the local arrangements in place in all 22, and we'll summarise those and add the national context into the national report, which will be published in early December. So that's why, quite consciously, there is very little of that contextual information in the local report, but it is something that, of course, we're all aware of. But in the report, paragraphs 9 and 10 recognise some of those wider contextual points, just to highlight that as being in the forefront of everyone's minds before looking at the local arrangements, particularly those around the impact of the financial crisis in 2008 and then inflation that we've seen in recent years. So I won't go through everything in the report. Just to summarise, that we concluded that the council, whilst having arrangements for the short to medium term, it lacks a long-term plan and regular assessments of the impact of decisions to support its long-term financial sustainability. We set out in summary, but below that the evidence for that, which I'll take as read. Just for brevity, and then, as Matt mentioned, we have two recommendations there. One around, colouring in those gaps, as so to speak, in terms of the medium-term financial plan, in terms of how the gap will be bridged, and the second one is around understanding impact and whether that impact is then materialised later down the line. So measuring it not just at the time a saving or a transformational change is proposed, but understanding it later down the line as well. Has that materialised? Has it been greater or less? Because in turn, that can help mitigate where a saving ends up costing money rather than delivering a saving. So that's all I wanted to really go through, Chair. But I'm happy to take any questions if members have any.
Thank you, Charles. Do we have any members of committee who'd like to ask questions of the report? Councillor Goodjohn, over to you.
If that's working now. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one for Matt, and I apologise. I know I'm probably being deeply critical of you at this meeting, and it's nothing special, nothing against you, but I feel like reflecting on the PPA that we went through recently, I was able to reflect on our budget setting process, and that combined with this recommendation from Audit Wales regarding the impact of our savings proposals on the community. I wonder if there's any scope in future medium-term financial plans or at any point during the financial budget setting process of more information about which saving proposals were rejected during budget setting sessions with officers in order to give us a greater flavour of the kinds of proposals that have been considered, and also what kind of impact that would have on the budget as well, to give us as councillors more options and more information around what could be coming up in the future, and also to give us a better understanding of what budget proposal, what saving proposals, and what budget setting could occur in the near future. For one example, we have had the school transport changes down the line for a few years, which has consistently been put off, but because that was ended up not coming to fruition, that saving proposal 1 year, it will then normally come back the next year. So having a few savings proposals that were rejected in 1 year would help us to understand what's being considered for next year better. So I don't know if there's any scope for that, or if that makes any sense at all to you, Matt. I'd be quite interested in your opinion.
So it does make sense. I'm probably not going to give you an answer this evening, though. I think it's one for me to take away and mull over and consider how we build that into our process. But I certainly do understand what you're saying and where you're coming from.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Carroll, you've also got your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Councillor Carroll, you're on mute.
Councillor Carroll, sorry to interrupt, sir. You've got earbuds in, I see. Have you connected those during the course of the meeting? So we're not receiving any audio from you at the moment, whereas we were earlier. If you wouldn't mind completely disconnecting, closing the browser window and rejoining us. And we're still not getting audio, I'm afraid. No, not at the moment. If you could, we're not hearing you, Councillor Carroll. Could you come out of the meeting, please, and close the browser window down and then rejoin the meeting? Thank you.
Whilst we wait for Councillor Carroll to come back into the room, I think I just wanted to also continue with the questioning, really, that Councillor Goodjohn has started on if there was a possibility that we could see some of the rejected ideas for savings. And also, I'm interested in, I know we've commented that where we've done EIAs, they've never actually been published or shared. And I'm wondering if that is something as well that might help members understand the impact more, and if we had that as part of our process. I don't know whether you think, Matt, that would just be very difficult to do, but if the EIAs are there and they have been done, I'm just wondering if that also would be something that we could possibly look at. Thanks.
Yeah, and they've obviously they've all been done in the past. What we've struggled to is make them, well, have full accessibility to them. and that's something I'll have a look into. We did when we set the budget last year, we did hold them in one place so that as a background piece of information. So that's something I'll go in and investigate.
Thank you. Oh, I think we've got Councillor Carroll back. I'll see if he can come in.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for the presentation. Just a few points in relation to it and in relation to the report. Firstly, the finding that the council lacks a long-term plan for long-term financial sustainability, while not surprising, is somewhat concerning in my view, given the fact that obviously you do need to fund projects moving forward. And I think if we look at the issue with regard to the savings targets and the counts and the findings, that actually meeting savings, I've lost my place in the report here. Here we are. The limited evidence base and mixed track record in delivering savings means that understanding may be limited in depth and accuracy. Obviously, this is something that does need to be addressed. So my question really is, what action is the authority taking to address that, to ensure that as we seek to deliver value for money moving forward, that will be delivered?
So just on my not surprising comment, I wasn't surprised with the findings in the report. What we have been doing, and you'll have seen this in the financial strategy from the past couple of years, is we've been attempting to get on the front foot. And in the 24/5 financial strategy, some of those themes that have been developed much more comprehensively as part of the reshaping programme were starting to surface in that strategy. So we're very much focused on moving from that 1 year sort of reactive, tactical based savings into more transformational and reshaping initiatives to be able to balance our budget both over the short and medium term. There is a mixed track record, and in part that harks back to 2021 and 2021-2, where because of very generous settlements for those couple of years, the council really didn't have a discernible savings programme at all, because the budget was pretty much balanced without them. So 23/4 and our £7.5 million savings programme, that was the first significant programme that the council had for a number of years. And I do take the point, and it's in the report, that hasn't been delivered in full, but about 85% of it was delivered, and mitigating action in place for a number of those savings initiatives. This year, a similar size savings programme, and again, I do recognise we are having some challenges in delivering those, and that's something that we do need to have a bit of great focus on, about not just having savings in our budgets, but actually fully delivering on them as well. Okay.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Councillor Carroll, for that question. Do we have any further questions for Charles and Gemma and Matt on this particular item? No? Okay. Thank you, committee. So if we move to the recommendations then. So that's that we would consider the reports A and B which we have done from Wells Audit and the management's response, that the committee now refers this on to Governance and Audit Committee and then on to Cabinet for their oversight and endorsement of the proposed council actions. If we could also add in the recommendations that we as a committee are also asking Cabinet to consider, that we would be able to see where saving ideas have been discarded and the reasons why. And also, I think, as I've already asked Matt, the recommendation that where EIAs have been used to support saving proposals, that is also something that members can see to better understand the impact on our communities, if that's okay. Brilliant. Can we have a hand then to move to the next item? Thank you, Councillor Drake, and thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Okay then, everybody. So I think at this point we were going to go back, weren't we, to what was agenda item 7, which is the presentation. It's an update on the Customer Service Centre C1V. And I think this is a presentation that Tony Curlis is going to do for us. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for your patience. Please.
No problem at all. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide a very brief update on the Customer Relations Service. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen.
Just so you know, Tony, it's asking for the, there you go, it's just appeared on screen. Yep, it's just on screen now.
Super. Okay, well, let's crack on then. So again, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to provide a very brief update on Customer Relations Service. As you will be aware, Customer Relations comprises of a number of different services, including telecare, wellbeing matters, Blue Card Badge, adult social care. Today, I wanted to focus on contact centre performance because we provide a lot of essential services through the contact centre, particularly to residents who may be vulnerable, may not have any other means of getting in contact with us, and it shapes a perception of the council from our residents. I've got 31 slides, but you'll be glad to hear I'm only going through 12 of them. For brevity, I've provided the rest of the slide, some data and some updates on other parts of customer relations for your information and interest. So just a bit of context. So over the long term, the contact centre has experienced a trend of reducing staff resources, but continued high demand. So we've reduced our staffing over the last few years by 22.5%. And also, so that's our call handling staff, but also support roles have reduced by 43%. The impact of that has been it reduces our ability to react to increases in demand, whether they're planned or unplanned, but also we are more vulnerable to high staff turnover or high sickness. And the consequence of that is that the average wait time, or how long our residents have to wait to get through to the contact centre, will go up in both of those scenarios. And we know that wait time has a high impact on overall resident satisfaction with the service. So our response was really to try to manage demand better by creating digital self-service opportunities, focused on those kind of high volume, low complexity, low risk services, so that we could have fewer calls in effect coming into the contact centre and maximise our call handling capacity to deal with those more complex and urgent needs, or when things go wrong. So very focused on that kind of human-centred approach. And of course, hoping that the impact of that would be to minimise wait times for our residents to get through to the contact centre. Consequently, since we started to introduce the GovService software in 2021, last year, of those services that were available online, 76% of those transactions were completed online. And for some of the more recent services we've developed specifically taking a digital approach, like garden waste services, we can achieve higher results. So 82% of this year's garden waste subscriptions were made online rather than call us. And as a result of that, we've had a 25% reduction in inbound call demand between 2020 and 2024. We do have some ongoing considerable operational challenges, however. So between April and September this year, we lost an average of 6 shifts per day for call handling, which is about 300 calls that would have been answered by those resources. And we actually peaked at almost half of our resources being off sick at any one time. That has had a major impact on our call handling ability and the average speed of answer. In addition to that, we have had a high number of staff either move within the council, which is great to see when people get promotion, but obviously we have an issue with retention, then challenges with recruitment, or the grade that we pay our call handlers isn't competitive in the market, and there actually is a long time for someone to become fully trained once we do recruit them. So that's a longer term impact. Crucially, we've had some delays in new digital solutions being implemented, particularly NEC, which the new online service has an opportunity for our tenants to report repairs and make bids on Homes for You scheme in particular, but of course the ability to move those services online hasn't materialised as yet. I probably won't do until July next year. Of course, we've tried to maximise our performance, offering overtime, moving our resources around, cancelling non-essential duties and activities, or delaying them. We are continuing to evaluate where that kind of demand is coming from, and we know that failure demand is having a big impact, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And to try and develop a kind of understanding of that seasonal demand so that we can use our resources and match our resources closely or more closely to that demand. And during that time, we've also been increasing the number of services we're able to offer digitally through the Granicus product, and supporting other digital activities. So the impact of that has been, so we have, you can see since May, with help from our HR colleagues, reduced the overall level of sickness in the contact centre. And that coincides with the move from our old contact centre building to our new one as well, which I'm sure has had an impact. And we've been relatively successful in recruiting replacements, so our vacancy rate has stabilised, and we've been able to kind of stabilise our performance overall. So this chart shows the bars show the inbound call volume per month. And the line, the dark blue line, shows you the average wait time for a customer to get through to speak to us in the contact centre. So just want to point out 2 things. So back in kind of June, July, August 2023, that was when we launched the garden waste service, and call volume shot up, and you can see that coincided with a spike in wait time. And then this year in May, June, July, that was during our peak staff absence. And you can see, even though call volumes were lower than they were during that garden waste introduction, the average wait time spiked again because we had a lot fewer resources. Since July, you can see, as we've reduced our sickness and trained up more staff and recruited, you can see the average wait time has started to come down. we are still providing a good service, so we know that that wait time has an impact on satisfaction, but it's really important that when people do get through to speak to a call handler, they get a great service. And based on post-call surveys, 91% of respondents are telling us that the call handler was really helpful. 89% are saying that the call handler was knowledgeable about the topic they called us about. Really important from my perspective is that 89% are saying that the CSR listened and understood the needs of the resident, which is really important in terms of making sure they get the service that they require. And overall, 73% are saying they were satisfied with the experience. We'd like it to be higher than that, and we're working hard to do that. But especially given the resourcing issues we've had this year, that's been a reasonably good result. I wanted to point out just two, the bottom two figures on this slide in particular. Only 64% of the people who filled out the survey said that they were confident that their inquiry was or would be resolved following their contact with the contact centre. And 42% of people told us that actually they'd called us at least twice about the same issue. And that's driving quite a lot of demand into the contact centre. So failure demand is impacting on our performance. Increased number of calls coming into the contact centre, and increased effort by the call handler, because quite often it takes longer to put things right or fix things than it does to deliver them right first time. And possibly as a reflection of this, corporate complaints are at a record high for 2023-24, and that's since we started to keep records back in about 2013. 61% of complaints are about service standards not being met, so that's where we're not delivering what we say we're going to deliver to our residents, whether that's within time or particular standards. And in this year's Ombudsman's report, they highlighted some really simple drivers of complaints. So Vale residents who have complained to the Ombudsman about our services have been prompted to do so because we have failed to respond to their communications, or we haven't kept them up to date with what was happening with whatever they had contacted us about, or there are delays in completing complaints. So really straightforward behaviours, which if we changed could make a big difference. The contact centre response is really to focus on brilliant basics, and this is a really important work stream in the reshaping services agenda. So focusing on those services and behaviours that matter most to our residents. And in the context of that means improving key performance indicators like maximising first contact resolution, reducing error rates, increasing efficiency and reducing handling time, and as a consequence of doing all that, minimising wait times. We've got a quality assurance and training process in place, really aimed at helping our call handling colleagues manage that citizen conversation better when they've got them on the phone, making sure that their subject matter knowledge is up to date so they can help the customer quickly and resolve their inquiry quickly, making sure they can use the tools that they've got available to them to make sure they do a great job, and that they capture all the information that they need from the customer. If we need to pass something on to another department, capture the information accurately so that the other department can deliver the service quickly and easily. But great citizen experiences, aren't just about the contact centre. We can do a great job, but improvements need to be made right across the whole citizen journey, from that first point of contact right through to the point of service delivery and everything in between. And we have launched a process or a review of our top 20 journeys. So looking at those top 20 customer journeys across whatever channel. It could be digital, it could be telephony, it could be email. And the aim is to identify causes of failure demand and look at opportunities to enhance that experience and improve our operational efficiency. To do that, we need to understand what that customer journey looks like. So what are all the touch points in that journey, and understand where if there's any friction at any point in the journey, and how can we kind of remove that friction and improve things for the resident. Identifying that failure demand and reviewing the process to try and remove the causes of that failure demand and improve the overall customer experience. So we know we will have been successful if we're able to clearly identify those key issues leading to failure demand. We develop insights which allows us to improve those processes and improve our resident experience. Making sure that we've got a clear set of KPIs for measuring those improvements. So that's understanding what's the customer experience right now, what are the key kind of measurement factors, if you like, and then making sure that we can take those forward so we can measure the difference in the process for the resident and also for the organisation. I just wanted to finish off by really highlighting 4 key activities that have happened recently, which kind of demonstrates the value of taking that approach. At the end of October, we introduced our very first telecare online process. Previously, all of our telecare applicants had to complete a hard copy paper form. So we've improved access to that service. We've launched a minimum viable product, which focuses on those key attributes that are needed for the resident to be able to access the service. The aim is to reduce inbound demand, but also we've made online payments available, and we're working on paperless direct debits, which will be the first time we've provided that online as a council. And it's once we've got that cracked, it's something we can take and deliver across other processes as well, and then proactively offer relevant services to residents who want to access the telecare service. Second one is around skip licensing. So we companies and individuals who wanted to apply for a license previously would have always had to phone us. We've now made that service live, and we've been able to tackle a few issues while doing that. So the assessment time, because of the information we collect online, because of the photographs and documents that our customers are able to upload online, that assessment time is now much reduced, so it takes up less officer time and it provides a quicker response for our applicants. We take payment upfront in advance via credit card, so that's reducing bad debt. It means that we're not sending out invoices to applicants, and that's reducing administrative overheads, and it's a process that is replicable for a number of other highways licensed services, so we're looking at replicating that process for other services also. The final 2 are around capabilities that can be used to improve a whole range of services. Citizen-facing GIS and mapping capabilities have been a real issue for us. We don't think what we've got just now is delivering the best service we can do. So working with the dev team in IT, we've been looking at the pothole reporting process. It's aimed at reducing customer effort. It also means that if we get it right, we can reduce error rates, only taking pothole reports when it's on council land, for instance. We can also use the information from the GIS layer where you've got, with potholes, for instance, you've got 3 different teams that look after different areas of Vale. Currently, we have to send all of those pothole requests to one team and then they get distributed out. But based on the GIS mapping information, we're able to then allocate that directly to the team who will be resolving that pothole issue, which means the service should be quicker and easier. So fewer delays and improved operational efficiency. And then the last one is really about a change in process. So the first 6 months of this year, we had 5,000 cases or services reported to us where the way the service was delivered was based on which council service happened to own the land. We've been working for a long time with colleagues to try and remove that requirement. and we've finally got agreement to do that, so that when the issue is reported, the case will be go straight to the team who are going to deliver the service or resolve the issue. So improve speed of response, a more efficient process, and reduction of administrative overheads, removing the need for things like inspections, quoting between different departments in the council, internal invoicing between different council departments. So a much more efficient way of working. So hopefully you'll see from those 4 examples that we are being really ambitious in terms of improving our service. We've got a clear plan to look at how we can improve services across all channels, but in particular in maximising our contact centre resource to make sure that we minimise those average wait times for our customers, and at the same time providing them with a great service once they get through to the call handler. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you for coming to committee tonight with a report that it isn't easy for you to deliver for us. It's not all sunny uplands and good news. And as councillors, we will all know this because residents have contacted us and said how hard it's been to get through to C1V. It's really helpful for us to understand the operational difficulties that you've been experiencing, and it provides context for why it's been difficult for people to get through. I just want to ask a quick question before I open up to everybody. On the very first slide, you showed that we have a reduced resource, which I'm sure has made it much harder for operations. That reduced resource, it's through attrition. It's not a deliberate attempt to reduce numbers before digitally we're ready to take the slack in other areas, was it? That's just something I wanted to check with you. And I understand that it sounds as if it's been very difficult to recruit as well, to do with market competition, and I understand that too. And it's really good to see that we now have more staff and we have a plan to improve. But if you could just come back on that one, and then I'll open up to everybody. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, you can, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. So our staff and resources have been reduced deliberately over a number of years in response to the requirement to make savings within the service and across the council. We made a contribution. We, in conjunction with that, did try to mitigate the impact of that through improving our digital services. I think it's fair to say that there was a little bit of a lag between making those resource savings and delivering improved digital services and creating that kind of channel shift to digital. But since 2021, we've had a great product in place that has allowed us to build some really good digital services, and that's helping. We also have been impacted by attrition and staff sickness as well, which has just kind of made things doubly difficult. As I hopefully indicated on the slides, we've worked really hard to improve that situation, and I've begun to see some improvement there.
Thank you, Tony. Just quickly then, do we feel now that we're confident that we have the resource and enough resource in the right places, along with your plan to improve and to continue to improve? Thank you.
I think that what's really important is that we are changing our focus from what we do just at the first point of contact with the for residents, and looking at how we manage demand better by improving the whole end-to-end service. So we mentioned earlier that 42% of people who responded to our satisfaction survey told us they had to contact us more than once. If we could reduce that significantly, then the resources we've got available in the contact centre will be able to manage that demand better, and importantly, really focus on those kind of inquiries and customer needs where they can add the most value, and deliver the best outcomes for our residents.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sure committee will have some other questions. So do we have any more for Tony? No? Hopefully everybody's still with me. I think then, Tony, can I ask, I can see that we are getting there. I can see that over the last few months, things are improving. So I just wondered, would it be okay for you to come back in another 6 months so we can also see, hopefully, that things have improved again? Would that be something that you could do? Oh, Councillor Johnson, he's come in now.
Yeah, sorry, Cadera, just to note.
Sorry, Chair, just to note, we've received papers for the other items. We know we've been here for some 3 hours, but it is clear that the desire to contribute has fallen somewhat. I'm not sure why we've had a presentation after almost 3 hours of discussion without having information in advance and content which would aid us in putting together questions and having consideration and for what's there. There's a lot of information, a lot of hard information in the presentation, but we have, as councillors, haven't had foresight of this, and we haven't had a true opportunity to consider what type of questions we would wish to put forward to Tony. So this is clearly just a bit of a problem when it's such a long agenda. But as well, if we don't know in advance, there's no report. We've just had a presentation, and it's difficult to maintain focus after a work day and so forth, and to think of questions. So just something for us to take into account as we put agendas together in future, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I agree that this is a presentation and therefore it doesn't come with a report, but there is information in there that it would have probably benefited all of us to have been able to see beforehand. So I think when we ask for Tony to come back in another 6 months, so we have the opportunity to see how things have improved. If we can also have a written report that goes alongside the presentation, that would be really beneficial. Thank you, Tony. And also, I agree that we have been debating for 3 hours as well. So we'll also talk about the length of agenda items and agendas for meetings too. So that's great. Okay, then. So if we can move to recommendations, if that's okay with everybody. So that was that the presentation was for noting, and I think that was basically all that we can recommend from this one, and that we also want Tony to come back in another 6 months' time to demonstrate the improvements and hopefully share the good news with us. And we'll also this time request a written report as well. And Tom's come into the room.
Thank you, Chair. And just to add that I'll make sure that the presentation is circulated to all members of committee. And as ever, if anyone's got any questions in between before Tony comes back, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Tony or myself, and we can make sure that we answer them for you.
Thank you, Tom. Right then, so can we have a hand to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. And the seconder? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Okay, so we are rapidly moving on, everybody, and thank you for your perseverance and your patience. So agenda item 9, which is a report of the Head of Legal and Democratic Services Monitoring Officer. This is a reflections report that committee requested, I think it was last summer, and that was that we see a reflections report on the hybrid platform meeting solution. So I think Vicky's going to do a quick introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, right. So this report, as you've indicated, reflects on the challenges faced by the Council following the implementation of the hybrid meeting platform Civico in October 2021. We entered into a contract the duration of 3 years at that point. As you've alluded to, Chair, this committee considered a reference from Cabinet on the 21st of June 2023 under Part 2, who recommended a further report to Scrutiny detailing the various success and challenges arising from the hybrid meeting platform project involving Civico. In considering the Part 1 report, because there is a Part 2 report that follows on, as I've indicated, there was a 3-year contract entered into with Civico, which commenced on the 1st of October 2021. And that contract was entered into with Civico at the time based on a good working relationship, as the contractor demonstrated understanding of the new technology. And we have to remember that the hybrid meeting platform technology is still very new in the market, and a collaboration or evidence of collaboration on their part with other councils on similar projects. So a Cabinet report was presented on the 17th of November 2022, which highlighted several significant issues with Civico's hybrid meeting platform and outlined plans for regression testing and proposals at that point to fix some of the issues that were being identified to ensure compliance, not only with the legislation, but also with the Council's multi-location meeting policy. Those findings were reported back to Cabinet on the 8th of June 2023. Cabinet reviewed those findings of the regression testing, and it was evident that there were significant issues which had been identified, and those were evident before and during the testing period. And the report set out, just as a reminder to the committee, the attempts made to address those issues. As I've indicated, Cabinet considered the Part 2 report, which recommended an attempt to address those issues, and more importantly, in making those attempts to ensure that we were able to provide a secure and stable, fit-for-purpose hybrid meeting platform solution that not only supported dual language, but also the use of electronic recorded voting. So then in June 2022, Civico developed and tested the contracted system, and the persistent technical issues subsequently then prevented full implementation. The issues that were being experienced, and members will no doubt recall this as to officers, culminated in a whole system failure at full council in its meeting in September 2022. And thereafter that led to further testing or additional testing during the course of the autumn and winter of 2022, which ultimately then failed to address the issues, as I've indicated, which led to the report to Cabinet in 2023. The discussions then which took place between the council officers and Civico commenced in early 2023. There was a meeting in May 2023 where Civico proposed a new product, which is outlined in the Cabinet report of the 8th of June. Then a further meeting was held in June 2023 and another meeting later that year. Following further negotiation, we subsequently agreed a mutual agreement or reached a mutual agreement to terminate the contract with no additional payments by the council beyond year 1 of the contract. And then subsequently the contract was finally finalised and came to an end in February 2024 by letter. So during the 12-month period of the contract, we, as an authority, engaged a new provider, VPAV Limited, who went on to test the EasyCom system. Progress reports then were considered by Democratic Services Committee in November 2023, and then Cabinet respectively on the 30th of November 2023. A report was then subsequently considered by the Democratic Services Committee on the 16th of July 2024 in respect of the Council's new provider, VPAV, and it was recommended at that stage, and Cabinet agreed with the recommendation that that a contract was entered into, albeit that was on a 1+1+1 year basis, so that the Council could continue to provide a stable hybrid meeting platform solution to ensure that we comply with the legislation and the MLM policy. The details concerning the negotiations and considerations following finalisation of the contract are set out in Part 2, so I'll go into a bit more detail when we go into a private session. So in terms of the reflections which the report sets out along the themes the committee were keen to hear about, the project timeline, I won't repeat it, but it is set out in paragraph 2.9 of the report, and I've touched on some of the timeline in presenting the report. The financial and legal aspects in relation to year 1 costs and year 2 costs. The initial equipment and system installations by Civico were completed. Technical failures obviously arose, which gave rise to the negotiations and subsequent termination of the contract. Year 2 work consisted primarily of the regression testing, which was performed, but due to unresolved technical issues, the alternative platform, was identified, and that, as I say, was on the authority of Cabinet in June 2023. And it's important to note that at that point, no further payments were made subsequently under the terms of the contract. So from a reputational and legal risks perspective, the primary focus was to avoid prolonged litigation and reputational damage by appointing a new provider to meet the statutory obligations. Paragraph 2.10 outlines the I think the numbering might be a bit off because I'm looking at an earlier version of the report that I drafted. But 2.10 looks at the successes that we had, and 2.11 looks at the challenges that were experienced. So some of the successes related to the Council's ability to demonstrate due diligence in pursuing a compliant hybrid meeting solution. There was evidence of risk mitigation in place. There was early identification of the technical failures, and then obviously a pursuit of a new provider, which limited, I'd submit, further reputational financial exposure for the council. Contract termination, once engaged, mutual termination was agreed. Obviously, litigation costs which might have arisen were avoided. No further payments, as I've indicated, were made under the terms of the contract, other than those payments made under the contract for year 1. And as a result, the legal costs were negligible, as the advice and negotiation was provided and facilitated by in-house lawyers. There was a legal cost benefit analysis undertaken in relation to any possible litigation that might have followed. The challenges obviously are evident: technical failures, with persistent software issues, obviously hindered the system's full implementation and the impact that had on hybrid meetings. There were some communication gaps identified, and obviously there were some contractual limitations, which I can go into more detail under part 2. I think from a lessons learned perspective, I would say that there is a need for, and what we found was a need for rigorous provider assessment, and really that should be achieved, and we've demonstrated that, I would suggest, in relation to the VPAV system, a more rigorous testing of the technical capabilities to ensure that we are confident that the provider can deliver the stable software that's required, and also communication channels could have been clearer and more responsive, and I'll touch on that in a bit more detail in relation to that aspect of the reflections as a result of this contract and how that contract operated under part 2. So just to conclude, we now have, and we're using it tonight, what is now a fairly stable hybrid meeting solution. It hasn't been without its issues. However, the team and the project team in particular have worked hard to work through those issues. There is still more work to be done in relation to the existing system. But we're very confident going forward that we will continue to be able to deliver meetings in the way that we are, and build on the features that are already available within the system. So I think in relation to the recommendations, if I can just go back to those. Chair, the committee notes the position as outlined within this report and considers the data provided in Part 2 report, and that the committee further notes the work undertaken to date in respect of the Council's contract with its current hybrid meeting platform supplier, VPAV.
Thank you. Thank you for that reflections report, Vicky. Yes, it's what we have now is obviously a world away from what we started out with. We can broadcast live, and we also have Welsh language translation, which is something that not many authorities can actually say. So that's something to be thankful for. Do we have any questions now for Vicky on part 1 of this reflections report? No? Okay. That's great. Again, I think this report, the recommendations are that the report was for noting. So we won't dwell, as we don't have any further questions. If I can have a hand to move, that would be great. Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Thank you, Councillor Drake. Now, as part 2, we don't have any further urgent part 1 reports, so we're going to move into part 2. But before I do, if I can just check with Karen that as the end of the meeting, from as far as the public is concerned, is now, that we say goodbye to the public and also to any other officers who don't need to be here for the last bit, because we have had quite a long and involved debate tonight. So if that's something that we can do, then
yes, Chair, that's something we can do. Amy's on the call, and she will let us know when we've gone into part 2 and we've removed the recording from the World Wide Web. But first of all, can I just ask committee to approve we go into part 2? This is a committee decision. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yes, so if committee is happy to do that, we'll just announce to everybody else and to the public that this is the end of the public part of the meeting. Thank you all for either watching, taking part, and our next meeting, the date of the meeting would be Wednesday the 18th of December, so just before Christmas. So get your festive jumpers on. Committee, are we happy to do that, to move to part 2 now? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Yeah, so I shall draw the public part of this meeting to an end, and I'll wait now for Amy to call us back in. Thank you, everybody.